some light in the room.
Could you turn that one on, please?
I think she's ready for the class to start.
Yeah, right. At least somebody's here on time, right, Mina?
Maria's online.
Hi, Maria.
Hi, Maria. Hi, Maria.
Take a letter, Maria. Okay, so we are up, we are online, we are broadcasting, and I'm gonna go sit down and regale the world with. Come on. Words of wisdom. And why is this gizmo not working today? It worked last night. This thing made the internet do something different.
What thing?
The remote. Still trying to juggle all this stuff. Okay. All right. We are ready. You want to start?
No, well, not necessarily. I just wanted to get reconfigured.
Yeah, so much for dress rehearsals.
No, because the first thing coming up is your dissertation. So
Yeah. Does everybody have their handouts?
No.
Where are they?
They're right here. I just haven't been able to sit down and do anything yet.
Right. No rush.
You got glasses over here if you think you need them.
I don't.
And are we live already?
We are live. Hello, Ciclamina. Ciclamina kitty cat. Big mouse over here. Get it. Get it.
Alright.
Thank you.
Is there one I could look at for this first little bit? Nina.
Yeah, I'll take it to him.
No.
It can get passed down. Thank you, ma'am. What are we talking about today? Something spiritual.
It must be essential. Or we wouldn't be here, right?
Right. So Maria or Melody, does Melody have one?
No.
I better give her one.
Was that an extra one?
Yeah. Hey Melody, your handout is here on the stairs.
Try to make sure those are closed all the way because there's a little shaft of bright light coming in from the vestibule.
No, we can't have that. No. Okay.
Alright, so the camera right now is cutting off the top of your head.
Oh. I don't like that. How's that?
That's better. Okay?
Does it need to go up anymore?
No.
Okay. Okay, so welcome everybody to our class entitled Spiritual Essentials. In the room here, we have myself, Golden Eagle, we have Aurea Luce, we have Yvonne Little Eagle, we have Patricia, and we have Wadib. And also online so far, we have Melody, who's actually not too far away physically, and we have Maria. Welcome, everybody.
Are we supposed to have? Oh, I see. Hold on.
What?
Oh, I was just looking at the other camera angle. So,
We've been having problems with the other camera. It has some kind of interference with the projector. So if you see those lines going, that's as good as it gets. I have no way of getting rid of that.
okay.
So
So are we going to use that angle? Do you
we
think?
may or may not. The first question I was going to ask is, Maria, do you have your handout, and can you follow along on the PowerPoint slides with what we emailed you? So we'll wait for her to give us an answer. I guess Melody upstairs, she does not have that,
Of what?
the copy of the PowerPoint slides. So what we'll do is every time we change slides, we'll show it for a couple of minutes and then come back to this camera.
Okay, so Maria does have what she needs.
Perfect.
Slide. Is that Ricky Chavez that's online? Hi, Ricky.
Okay.
And, yeah, and then the Melody. I don't see where really at. So, okay. Yeah.
Okay, so the question that I'm sure is foremost in your mind is, where did this class come from? And the purpose of
Okay, so I have the recording part up. It doesn't need to be up, right?
this part needs to be there, although it can be in the background. The recording part is only needed if we're going to switch cameras, and this part we can check periodically for comments. But apparently, no. The issues with the PowerPoint not going unless it's exerted. So that has to be on top when I go to change slides, and then we can go look at the other stuff. Yeah, we're trying a new configuration today, everybody. We're trying to run several things at once, and it was working last night during dry run dress rehearsal, or to use the theater term, the tech rehearsal, and everything worked fine. And then today, we turned it all on, and it's behaving oddly. So the questions behind this course are the same questions humanity has been asking itself from the words I like are time immemorial. As long as there's been conscious humans, these are the questions people have asked, which are, who are we, really? Kind of a corollary to that is, what are we? Where did we come from? Why are we here in the physical world? And where are we going when we're done here? And the search over the eons for the answers to those questions is what was the precipitating driving force behind religions and spiritual systems and philosophy, and all the various related schools of thought throughout time. Even before recorded history, we find ruins, we find petroglyphs that we can tell that these have been the questions that people have always asked. Now, of all those hundreds, if not thousands, of philosophies and spiritual systems, some of them have actually done a good job of conveying real divine truth. Most, however, have not. Starting in the 1960s, here in more modern times, the big cultural revolution that began then, where people were rejecting everything from the dogmatic past, led to the creation of what came to be known as the New Age movement, or the New Age religious movement, which really there's nothing new about it other than it's different compared to several thousand years of dogma. The principles that the New Age movement was teaching were based on very, very old, very, very ancient teachings. A lot of them came from India, where they seem to have, in general, done a better job of not burning their books than the European Western traditions have done. And the whole New Age movement, for whatever reason, seems to have, I was like, I swear I didn't push the button. Seems to have attracted a lot of charlatans and self-proclaimed gurus whose main purpose is to make a quick buck. Here's a feel-good spiritual system. It's nice and fluffy and warm and fuzzy, and you don't have to do anything hard, and you'll just be enlightened by just sitting here and doing nothing. And nothing could be further from the truth, as many of you know. The real work requires work. And there's oftentimes nothing fluffy or feel good about it. So you have to do work. It's that same analogy I've used about going into the forge and being pounded and melted and pounded and melted to create an alchemical change within us. And so for the beginners, people just starting out on the path, or even some who've spent years on what they thought was a new path, learning how to tell the difference between a legitimate system and an illegitimate system, one of the fake, fluffy, feel-good systems, learning that difference is crucial. And this course grew out of the knowledge that Aurea and I have each accumulated over several decades in an attempt to find a real path, which we have done. And then this course is intended for everybody else to shorten the process of finding your path. There's more than one legitimate path. Can we just not do that?
I almost have it. I'm trying to get it so that I can look at the comments, and I'm just trying to make sure that when you need to change the slide, that the one you need is up there. Okay. So otherwise, it's not doing any of the things that we needed to do, and I might as well be sitting somewhere else.
Okay. So let me see if it can. Okay, good. So I don't want to dwell on this next slide too much. This is based on an introduction, or the concept is, what exactly do we mean by spiritual? Because most people are more familiar. You're not knocking over the cameras, are you? Most people are familiar with organized religions. So the concept of spiritual implies the existence of planes beyond this one, where matter and beings are very diffuse compared to this dense physical reality that we live in. And I've got a dictionary definition up here of spiritual. I think a discussion of spirituality, though, really needs to focus on, first, what it is not. Spirituality is not a belief in any one religion or any one God or set of gods. To really understand this concept of spirituality and the existence of planes beyond this one, we need to spend some time looking at what we believe the structure of the universe is. And then before we really get to that, we have some basic background principle as to where this level of understanding comes from. And please feel free to ask questions as we go.
Can I just interject there?
Yes.
So basically, this slide presentation has generic information that should be found on any true spiritual path. There's quotes in here at the top of each slide from many different spiritual systems. There's images in here from many different cultures and philosophies. And so there's a logical build in the progression of the images in particular to build some concepts on one on top of the other. Otherwise, it might seem like a lot of random information. So what we're trying to convey here is that there is a coherency to what everybody is tapping into. Doesn't matter what religion or philosophy or whatever it is, they're tapping into something and they don't know how to make sense of that. So they come up with a system that explains that in their culture. And what we see now from looking at the broad overview is that there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of clear indication that we are tapping into similar things. So keep that in mind as we go through the slides, and we are going to go, I mean, this is like a sampler of all the things that you could possibly have heard of or be interested in that we know to have a foundation in truth. So that doesn't mean we're promoting one thing or another. We're not saying any of this is part of the Toltec path or something that you should or need to be doing, but you should recognize when you run across or resonate with something that either you have been doing or that you have been drawn to and haven't followed your whatever followed up on it. And these are indications of whether they're part of your true will or not. So the thing is it's, if you already know, if everybody in this room already knows when we get to how to set an altar, since we're just involved in a lot of that work, then we can just move on. We don't need to dwell on it. But if you have serious questions, if you're like, wait a minute, let's go back and talk about that thing that you just rambled off, that's a good place for a question. Okay.
So you'll notice that we have art interspersed in here as we go. And this artwork is not random. Aurea has done a really good job of finding artwork from her almost PhD in art history, from around the world of many cultures to convey the truth. And these quotes are not random either. So this is from the book of Genesis. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden and the tree of knowledge. What's seldom understood in most Judeo-Christian teachings is they're describing one tree. It's the same tree. You'll learn more about it anyway. So some of these core truths are, we are spiritual beings who have come into this physical world to have a physical experience, to gain knowledge, experience, and do things that can't be done from the higher planes. Most religions would have you believe that it's reversed. You're a physical being, and if you do good, you can have a spiritual experience, and maybe someday you'll get to go to heaven. And we've already been to heaven. We're here on a mission, so do your mission. A lot of different cultures talk about these same concepts through mythology, the genealogies, through sacred artwork, and what in modern times has come to be known as the archetypes, as documented primarily by Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell. The archetypes are the fundamental forces and energies that underpin the whole structure of our universe. And the best description of this comes from the Judaic traditions, specifically with the Kabbalah and the Kabbalistic tree of life, of which this is a representation over here.
Just so you know, when you lean forward to look at the screen, we're starting to lose your head again. So
Okay.
I don't know that there's anything that can be done about that unless you want to just tip it up a titch more.
We'll try that.
Okay.
Because I don't have a printout, so I've got to lean forward to see what I'm talking about.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
I do have that one you had printed out with notes on it.
It's
probably
not the same version,
Yeah.
so this is fine. I'm going to talk more to the one on the right, and then at the end I'll say just a little bit about the one on the left. This is the tree of life, and it is complex. And through the spring, we are going to be studying this more, because you can think of this as you have similar pictures, but not identical.
They do have this one, and that's why I put this one in here.
The tree of life is composed of a series of 10 spheres is how it's drawn, that we call Sephiroth, plural, or Sephira, singular. And they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. The one at the bottom is known as Malkuth, or the kingdom, and it represents the physical world that we live in. Up at the top is the link between everything down here and to cross the veil to whatever lies beyond. This is the spheres at the top. Hokmah represents God the Father, and Binah represents God the Mother. So any religion which doesn't acknowledge that there is a God the Mother is by definition either trying to deceive you, or they themselves don't know any better, and it's an incomplete system at best. The pathways interconnecting all the trees also each have an energy. There's a core energy with each Sephira. There's a core energy on each of the interconnecting paths. And the colors over on this one represent the energies associated with that. And you'll see a lot of systems will really emphasize the colors. There's a lot that needs to be done for your ability to learn this before we get down to the level of detail of caring about the colors. The first thing to do is learn the 10 Sephiroth by name and the 22 paths by name. Start there. Practice drawing it until you can draw the whole thing and identify each Sephira and each path. A couple other things. Up at the top is a 3-layer veil. The 3 layers are known as the Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof hour. And then between the upper 3, the upper triad, and the next 3, there is a gap we call the abyss. And when we get into the fine-tuned details of what that represents, crossing the abyss is the ultimate spiritual attainment one can make. There is what's known as the hidden Sephira, called Da'ath, which means knowledge. It's not really considered to be part of the tree, but it is.
It's a space.
It's a space, and there's something that happens there, and you'll get to know it eventually. Then we have the next triad down, the next triad down, and at the base is Malkuth, the physical world. There's a lesser veil here between this lower triad and the middle triad called the veil of Peroketh. That's what that little dotted line represents. And what else did we need to say here? Oh, the middle 6 form a structure known as the Ruach, which means you've entered a phase where your consciousness is now residing up here, and you can go here in order at will, and you're not just a blue pillar down in the Malkuthian physical world. So there's other ways of analyzing this that we're going to look at.
Hold
now.
on. Okay, so down there, we can put the pointer at Malkuth. So I'd like you to start paying particular attention to different symbolism. So there's no way that we can write on one image all of the things that it could possibly mean. This is about as clear as an image with the most amount of information that you can have in one image without it just becoming a mess. And so the reason that it's important to start learning symbolism is because it's the language of the archetypes. It's the language of the dreaming, it's the language of the bardo, and the more you start familiarizing yourself with this level of esoteric knowledge, the more you'll be able to see and glean quickly by looking at any type of an image that is trying to convey some sense of a spiritual meaning. And
Right.
so when you look down there at Malkuth, you'll see that there's a circle with a cross in it. Okay, so this is where we are. This is the physical world. There is nothing physical about anything above that, other than what we can affect. It will affect us here in the physical.
So that symbol, that circle with the cross in it, is used in astrology and astronomy as the symbol for the planet Earth.
So if you know astrology then, so a lot of these symbols that you're seeing both on the pathways and on the Sephiroth are astrology symbols, the planets, and the sun and the moon and the earth. And they're also the number for the major tarot card that would, from the major arcana, of the tarot that would correspond with that. And there's also the Hebrew letter. So if you remember that this whole thing is based in, this glyph, this information, this system comes down to us through the Hebrew tradition. But at the same time, it is universal. And any form of truth should be able to be overlaid on this, and you'll be able to see the correspondences. So when you look at the pathways, you'll see some of the correspondences. You'll see that they have a Hebrew letter, some type of alchemical symbol, whether it's the planets or the moon or the whatever, and it will have the major number of which tarot card it is.
So for tarot, here's 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on, down to 21. There's 22 paths, but they're numbered 0 to 21, as a for instance.
So where we're looking at the Ruach, that square kind of in the middle, this is where most of our higher level work is happening. Most people who think they're talking to God are actually only going up, 1 or 2 Sephiroth. Where there's kind of a glass ceiling there where we talk about that veil, and that is where, when you're talking to someone that you consider to be a higher spiritual person, that's not where they're physically residing, but it's where they're working from spiritually, if that makes sense. Now, ultimately, we all want to be talking to God, right? So we want our prayers and our meditations and our manifestations to go clear up to the very highest thing that we can talk to. But we need to realize that depending on where we're at in with our vibration and our ability to understand and comprehend, that we may be talking to lower level beings that are here to help us or not on our path. And this will help you as a kind of a secret decodering language to the esoteric, or to your dreams, to what you run into in the bardo, what you run into in your meditations and so forth, and what you run into on the street, because all of that can manifest down into Malkuth. So just really quickly, look over the colored one. If you looked at the colored one down in Malkuth, you'll see that there's that same symbol, right? And it's got it broken up into 4 quadrants, which are the basic elements that you need to learn to balance in your Malkuthian world before you're ready to do the higher work. Now, that doesn't mean you're not already tapping into and working on a spiritual level up in these higher realms somewhere.
women in particular access Yesod, which is the energy of the moon, and Nitzak, which is Venus, and these paths in between, you do that easily and naturally. Men tend to be very left-brained and logical sometimes, although not so much these days. Just look at the news.
Yeah.
But anyway, we access this path easily. We like to bypass this one. It takes work to not bypass Yesod. So the goal, of course, in each triad, well, I'll talk more about that when we get to triads.
You go ahead.
Okay, so there's several ways of analyzing this tree of life. So now we've kicked over to this next one. The three spheres on the left correspond to the male pillar, the yang pillar, the pillar of severity, also known as the pillar of strength, and it represents energy that's descending from on high. The right-hand pillar, and these are from the point of view of as you look at it, not as you overlay it on your body.
Why is that? That's the opposite of what you just
No,
said.
this is the male, it's the
Right.
left hand as you look at it.
Yeah.
But when you overlay it on your body, you back into it.
Right.
And so this is my right hand male descending energy, left hand female. So that confusion has been propagated by a lot of different authors and a lot of different schools, some of them deliberately, where they will swap the symbolism on their drawings specifically to confuse the uninitiated. And the time, at least for this, has passed where we need to worry about people, about trying to mislead people. Time is of the essence. I need people to learn this quickly. So we tell you the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And if it conflicts with other systems and you have questions about that, call me. Otherwise, go with this. The middle pillar is neutral or balance. And the three-pillar analogy is used in a lot of systems. This artwork on the upper right, this is a version of the Tree of Life as displayed in Masonic symbolism.
You didn't discuss the inside at all.
Now say that again.
You didn't discuss the feminine pillar
No.
at all. Oh.
Okay, not yet. And then down here we have another symbolism where this is the typical symbol for descending energy or the male energy. And over here we have a symbol for the female energy, the ascending energy. And when they merge, they make the six-pointed star, the so-called Star of David. So the pillar of mercy gets its name from the sphere Hesed, sphere number 4. The pillar of strength or severity gets its name from sphere number 5, which is Gebra, or severity or strength. And then the middle pillar, the pillar of balance, is most often referred to as the pillar of beauty, and it takes its name from Tifereth. Sometimes in some systems this pillar of mercy will be referred to as the pillar of wisdom. So Chokmah over here gives the name the pillar of wisdom. In general, the spheres have an alternating polarity, male, female. Okay, this is male, this is female. So, and that's the same principle behind the alternating polarities in an electric circuit, like within the plates of a battery. In order to drive the circuit, you have these alternating polarities. So this is the male pillar, and it carries a male energy downward, but Binah, of course, is the Divine Mother in heaven. That's feminine. Hod is feminine. Gebra is masculine. So you get this alternating back and forth. And that has confused some authors, apparently, because I've actually gotten rid of books who are so off base on this one subject that it's like, no, we're not going to deal with that one. So the pillar of balance, the pillar of beauty in the middle, this pillar of unification is another name that you will see, comes about as you work your consciousness back up the tree. For each of these three triads, and you'll see a picture of the triads in a minute, the two opposite extremes have to be balanced, and then you produce a strong sphere in the middle. So Hod and Nitzak have to be balanced to produce Yesod. Geburah and Hesed have to be balanced to produce a strong Tifereth, and so on up the tree of life. Any questions on that? Okay.
Are you ready to move on?
I am.
Okay, so I think the number one thing that I've noticed from a sacred geometry perspective when people are trying to do religious or sacred art is when you look at those 3 columns there, and you've got the descending triangle is related to male. And what they'll do in their minds is switch that to being the woman's yoni, so the vessel or the collection. So they're trying to reverse those and then saying that the one pointing up is the male phallus pointing up. So either way, you need to know that it's just based off of your experience with using the Akadwa. You know that it naturally flows down the right and up the left. You know that from a perspective, and we'll go into these in just a minute, that, you know, with the creation aspect, that to create, you're bringing down energy, and it's more of the feminine role than to convert that energy and reharness it and send it back up as devotions and prayers and so forth. The picture up in the corner of the Masonic columns. Look at some of the symbolism in there. Okay, so what's up top of the male column? What's up there in the sky?
The sun.
So the sun is you know, commonly related to the man, or to the male energy, to the masculine energy, and then you can see the moon above, and I believe that's a star in the center.
It's either a star or it's in the middle is a representation of the all-seeing eye.
Right.
It's the typical.
Okay. So you see the ladder going up, and you see then that there's people working to work their way up the ladder. Now we don't see in that picture the tree of life, but it's also called Jacob's ladder, and it's referred to a ladder a lot in the symbolism. So look at some of the things down on the ground on the checkerboard square. Those are all geometric shapes. They're tools. They're architectural tools. And in Masonry, you know, there's a lot of language that's architectural, the building of. So it gives us a kind of a symbolic image of what it is that we're trying to do. We're trying to build and climb our tree. And we need these accurate geometric tools to help us chart what it is that we're doing. It's not random.
Are you able to see if we have questions from them?
Yeah.
See if we have any questions that we've been missing.
Okay. I don't see any questions.
Okay.
So, so just remember that those symbols and then how they overlap. So what that's showing you in the center column is that unification of something that's going up and down. When you're a newborn baby, you probably come straight down that middle column. But the energy surrounding you is going to be that descending creation energy. When we die, we're probably going to go straight back up that center column. But then we have the ascending energy flowing the opposite direction. And when you see those, it's the double helix spiral. All right.
Okay, so paths and triads. And what I want to talk about here are 2 things. One, I'm going to look at the right side and talk about the triads first. The upper 3, which are, I should quiz you, but I know you haven't had a chance to study, Kether, Chokmah, and Binah, constitute what's called the supernal triangle, which means it's above the rest of the universe. Okay, here's the abyss, so it's above the abyss. The middle triangle is referred to as the ethical triangle, consisting of Geburah, Hesed, and Tifereth. And down here, the astral triangle from Yesod, Hod, and Nitzak. And when you're studying the tree of life and you're learning to manage these, we go up the tree by triangles. In part, by triangles, by the triads. Now, over here on the left, we have a 2-way path. that is the path that energy comes down when the universe is created. So this is the path of creation, or the path of invocation. And then we have, it goes this, it's also called the path of the flaming sword. It's called the lightning bolt path. And it systematically touches on all the Sephirah, but it does not, Sephiroth, excuse me, but it does not touch on all the 22 paths. And it has one path here, when it jumps from Binah down to Hesed, where it goes through where Da'ath is, but that isn't necessarily an official path on the Tree of Life. When we take our consciousness back up the tree, we follow the path of the flaming sword in reverse, like so. You will even find in scriptures references to things like guarding the tree of life with a flaming sword. So it doesn't mean you can't go up, it just means you have to know how to deal with the flaming sword.
So, of course, they can't see anything that you're seeing because we're not switching to the other camera.
Right.
So I need to switch to the camera for each slide. And it's not angled to get the whole
Mina
screen.
knocked it around.
Mina!
And I have a witness to that. How's that?
That's good enough. So
Okay.
you guys online, I'm sorry about the whole slideshow thing with the weird interference patterns, but at least you can see a little bit of what he's referring to with these triads and then the lightning bolt path here.
Okay.
What?
All
Oh,
right.
hold on. Okay, so this is the thing. As soon as I have to type a comment in, then it switches it. So I'm trying to figure out how the easiest way to get back
Okay.
to that other one being on top. And
So
it's
go,
not that.
yeah, go type your
Hi,
comments.
Spirit.
Yeah, Miss Spirit.
This one. This one we want. There. Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
I went two. Okay, this one, let me see what's next. Okay, do you want to take over and talk about this one?
Sure.
I'm going to go refill my tea.
Huh. Maria says that the flaming sword is like a Harry Potter scar.
Yeah.
Harry Potter scar.
Okay, so I have these overlapped so that you, well, I don't even need to be over here because I have this pulled up so that they can see it because there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
Okay, so this, do I have a pointer?
Where did I leave it?
Where you-
Oh, it's right here.
How do you work it?
The red dot is the button in the middle.
Okay. All right. So this shape here in the middle is what's called a mandorla, and from the basic geometry contained within this, we create all life basically. So when you look at this, from this shape alone, we can create the flower of life. And we can create the 3 spheres in here. And you see that there's actually a 3-dimensional nature to this, what's created in here. You see this checkerboarded floor here. It looks like it's going off into the distance. It's got a 3-dimensionality to it. I just want to draw your attention to this because I'm going to show it to you again in some other sacred art that'll be coming up. Now, so from earliest times, we knew how to make, we knew how to use linear art and geometry. And if you look at this is some of the oldest characters, not for an alphabet, they weren't writing a word, but to represent an entire concept. The mountains in particular, you can see how that evolved over time into what we know as
cuneiform
script, which does become, it's still not really letters, it's more of a concept in the way that they're arranged. Right. But you have more of a uniform language here, where we started out with these more geometric concepts that were carried on into later systems.
Now the cuneiform, just so people know, those funny triangle shapes that make up the bulk of it, or maybe a straight line, came about because cuneiform was written on clay tablets. And they had this little stylus thing that was triangle shaped that they would press into it to make those patterns. And so that's an example where the technology they had for writing on the clay tablets drove how the symbolism was used. And then when they were done writing it, they would bake the clay tablet, and that's kind of where the carved in stone concept comes from.
So anyway, you can see how it all is related to these linear symbols that from a very early time began to be used for sacred geometry. It doesn't get perfected until we get to the Renaissance in some ways. In some ways, it does what it needs to do to convey its message. So over here, then, you see the circle. And by overlapping two circles halfway through to each other, you create what's called the Vesica Piscis. And within the Vesica Piscis is where you have this mandorla shape. So simply by overlapping the two circles, you've created this, and by creating this, you have the geometry to do everything else. It was that simple. So a circle, we could just draw a circle in the sand, and as long as we have two identical circles that overlap exactly halfway into each other, we create the perfect geometry to be able to do everything else. And so from that mandorla, then we have the geometrical points to create a perfect equilateral triangle. And from that, then we have the points necessary to create a perfect pentagon. And within a pentagon, then we have the opportunity to create a perfect pentagram. And so on, and we go into the seed of life and the Kabbalic tree of life, which can be found inside of that and the flower of life, and all the way up until we hit Metatron. So in other words, this is the basic sequence of, or what does it say, practical elements of sacred geometry. And how it works, and how it's been around forever, and it didn't take a rocket scientist necessarily to begin this process. So the ancients knew something about these processes, whether they recorded them perfectly or not. That's all I have to say about that.
Okay.
Go on to the next one.
Okay, so the next one, there's a bar on the right-hand side. Hit that. Okay, hang on. Come on. Okay, now hit the bar on the right-hand side. There we go.
Okay, so I think then now what we're doing is we're shifting into why is all this important? And so in discovering our true will, there's things that we know that we're supposed to do. We're here. We've known this pretty much all of our life, especially if we have a big part to play. That doesn't mean that we don't all have work to do here that's on a basic level. We all need to obtain a body, have a series of experiences, live a useful life, and contribute in some way to humanity. But some of us have things that have been haunting us all of our life that we may have even been running away from. And so there's something important that we're supposed to do, but we can't quite remember what it is or how it fits in. And there's things that we resonate with, and there's things that when it's kind of like playing hot potato, cold potato. When you're closer to it, you know things are moving right. You have that resonance. It may be tough. It might be challenging. It might put you out of your comfort zone. But you know that that's what you're supposed to do. And you know when you're running away from it. This feeling, this memory, a sense of purpose is an archetype. And we all have it to various degrees. It's archetypal. Yes, go ahead.
So the archetypal, this is where we bridge the gap from the tree of life into our life and our true will. So every sphere, every pathway represents a core energy, and that structure, that background structure is documented in the tree of life. That defines and creates the archetypes. So whether you're talking Jungian psychology or mythology or anything else, astrology, for example, is all overlaid on the tree of life, and those core archetypal energies are why we resonate with and feel this sense of purpose in life.
So what did you go ahead? I can't read it well enough.
We have this memory that we're supposed to be doing something, but we can't quite remember what it is. And we don't even remember why it is that we know that we have something to do. And it's something we were born with, and it's part of a higher will beyond us. And our piece of that larger will is what we call our true will. And you will find other names throughout the literature, like your divine purpose, your destiny, your dharma. Oh, dharma's in there twice. Okay, great. Your dharma, or your true purpose, or your dharma, or your divine purpose, or your dharma, either one. It's all good.
Like,
but don't forget
that
your
was
dharma.
something you told me to add.
And I look up there, and it's plain as day up on the big screen. It's already there. And so the real goal, here is the $64,000 question. The real goal of a spiritual path in life is to connect you with your true will, and the best way to do that is to connect with your holy guardian angel. We all have, and we'll talk about this more later, an angel assigned to us and to nobody else, and that angel's job is to guide us towards our true will. And everything else that we teach, that any path teaches, is merely the skills and techniques to try to put your mind and consciousness in a position to make this contact with your angel and your true will. And if anybody says otherwise, then it's a false path. That's the bottom line. Okay, let me get back over to this other thing. Okay.
So, what does that mean? You know, you find your true will. We've talked about this a lot. So, it really comes down to your personal practice. And you got to start somewhere. And we're going to be talking about personal practice later this afternoon. But this is more of your starting level. It's more of your Malkuthian personal practice. It's, you know, motivating yourself to get up and do your thing, you know, and to have a series of things. And these don't have to be written in stone. They don't have to be, you know, baked in a cuneiform form tablet. But the point is that you got to start somewhere, and then you can refine that, and you can see what works, and you can throw stuff out, and you can add something in new. And again, we're not telling you what to do. We're just saying you need to have, you know, X, Y, and Z things that you're attempting to work on. And there's two parts to this. There's the fact that yeah, you want to start pushing your, your spiritual path. You want to start reading books and practicing, exercises and, getting better at those skills. But all of that's kind of worthless if you can't get out of bed and motivate yourself to, to do your thing. If your home and body and life is in chaos, then it's kind of a moot point. You're not ready to work yet. But that doesn't mean we put off our spiritual path. We got to start balancing those things. So as you see us go through these things that we're going to be bringing up next, which are kind of the basics of get this down. Sarah, did you take this class before? Okay, so this is new to you. And new to you, but you've had it, and I think Melody's had it. I can't remember. No. So it's really just you. This stuff is stuff that you already had, and I don't know if you've ever looked at it again, but it's the basic stuff that you need to do to get your spiritual machine moving, and in balance with your physical life.
So yeah, we talk about the different tools and different ways to develop each skill that you're going to need. So we teach multiple ways of meditating. We teach multiple ways of setting altars, multiple ways of engaging with the dreaming, and so on. And you don't need to do all of them. You need to do the method that works for you to develop that skill to help you connect with your higher angel.
So remember, it's not about, collecting a bunch of skills by taking a weekend workshop. Anybody can do that. You can buy a book. And if you don't look at it, read it, and practice it, it's just a theory, not a practice. So to make it practical, it means you're doing it, and you're doing it either daily, which is best simply because if you don't do it daily, then, it'll start falling apart. But if, let's say, there's a particular day of the week you can't do X, Y, and Z, that's fine. There's no rules about this. You're the one putting this together for yourself. You have to see the reason for it and the purpose of it and how it's going to, help you. So, moving along, we are now...
Hang on. I got to get back over to here. Now you can do it.
We're looking at the basic skills and tools. I want to first speak to this quote here, as above, so below. And that's kind of what I was trying to capture in this image here.
Cool.
You see, this is actually, for those of you who've had a trinket reading, one of the geometric ideas that I had for the basis of this. So, in other words, you have see the triangles? And you see that we have this point at which we're down here below the astral waters. Things seem a little more watery. But there's a clear image that's being reflected. But there's a mirror image going this direction. We have the coloring that's changed, you see, in the mirroring. So there's points at which we're transversing the universe, for lack of a better word, or the tree of life, which this would fall within. That there's rules that apply here that are different there, but there's an essential as above, so below concept that you always need to think of. If you're, let's say, having issues with some, let's say, baking cookies, it's just not working, right? There's a correspondence to that baking cookie principle that's happening on the higher planes as well. And sometimes when we can't find the answers that we're looking for here, we need to look beyond where we're at and realize that there's this as above, so below concept that's happening. This is one of the key idioms of what?
No, finish your sentence. I just want to interject something.
Well, it comes from the Kabbalion, which is has nothing to do with a Kabbalah. Okay. But it's a Hermetic principle, and they're basic, simple principles when you read them, and yet at the same time, there's all of the physics and geometry and higher influences and relationship to what we're dealing with here on Earth. So even though it's a simple phrase, when you start expanding that and applying it to your challenges and your work as you go through it, you'll find some benefits in that from studying those idioms. Yes?
You used the cookie analogy. Does it also apply to making yogurt?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Good. Just curious about that.
There's definite universal laws about yogurt. So these are the topics. We're going to be going through a slide for each one of these, but these are the basic things we're looking at. Ethics, grounding, altars, sacred tools, creating space, clearing and banishment, invocation and evocation, and holding space. And when we were talking about the reason for this class, it's that we were finding people who claim to be high-level spiritual gurus or even light workers and so forth, who are taking it upon themselves to believe that they have the powers and abilities to alter and change and shift things, and yet they have no ethics, they have no grounding, and they don't even know how to set an altar. And some of this comes from the concept that, oh, now we're all, fifth dimension, and we don't need altars, and that's so last century, and that's, pagan worship, and that's this, that, and the other. We are in Malkuth, and until you are a disembodied spirit, you are not living in the fifth dimension. Right now, right here, you have a physical body in a physical place, and you have physical elements that are at your disposal. Learn how to use them. Otherwise, they will be used against you. So, it doesn't matter who you think you're playing ball with. This is a spiritual battle, but it is being played out in a physical plane, and we need to have a sense of ethics. How much ethics is going on in the world right now?
Not a lot.
Not a lot.
If any.
A good reminder is when you look at these pictures of the Tree of Life, everybody thinks that in order to be spiritual, they have to climb the Tree of Life. And, I'm going to disassociate myself with this dirty, foul, filthy, physical world. Malkuth is on the Tree of Life. Malkuth is part of the spiritual universe. And you can't go any higher until you master Malkuth. You have to have some basic things covered. You have to be able to feed yourself, clothe yourself, and sleep without being rained on. That's the bare minimum you have to be able to do. You want to have some nice books that you can read? Well, you might want to do more in Malkuth than just get your food out of dumpsters and get your clothes out of the free box at the Goodwill and sleep under a freeway off-ramp. That'll meet the bare minimum of survival in Malkuth, but it isn't going to help give you a foundation that you can then use to climb the tree and do higher work, and in most cases, the work you were called here to do.
So these topics here are general and generic. They don't necessarily refer to a specific system or path or spiritual practice or anything, but they're placeholders that you're going to want to have in your spiritual practice. There's something about an ethics, creating your own code of conduct, your own standard. We hear a lot about morals, and that seems to have the connotation that some religion or some guy in a suit told us that we have to have this set of morals. And so at the same time, we want to behave in a manner that is consistent. Otherwise, we start sending off mixed signals. So let's move on to ethics.
It should work.
In theory.
In theory. Now try it.
There we go.
I don't know why it didn't do it the other way.
So I don't want to spend a lot of time here. If you've been through the Akadua classes, you should know this stuff. and it harm none is the Wiccan Rede. And we hear all sorts of different versions of that. Do what thou wilt, but it can't harm anybody, right? Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, but what kind of law? It's love is the law. Love under will. So there's a lot of different references to will, and this is the completion of it for this particular system. It can't harm anybody. Well, okay, what if you're being attacked? I mean, harm is not the same as self-defense. And we won't go into all of that. We've talked about this before with ethics in the Akadua classes. But basically, before you help anybody and before you reach out, you need to ask for permission. We give a lot of unsolicited advice. We have a lot of pieces of the puzzle, but unless we're practicing what we preach and we know, not just believe, then we really need to ask permission anyway, and not just, vomit all of our knowledge on other people. Speak to the essence. Remember that we all have our bad days because we are living in a human biological machine that has needs and wants and can often throw a temper tantrum. So not everybody is always going to be at their best. It's not our job to judge them. But at the same time, we want to be speaking from our higher self to their higher self. And you can diffuse a lot of situations by being the grown-up in the situation and just simply identifying with your higher self, your essence, and speaking truth to another person's essence. They may not accept it on a lower level, on their ego-based level, but they do hear it on the higher self. And if the higher self has any influence on the ego, then it will make some changes. So unsolicited advice was what I was referring to a second ago. So, just because you see somebody that you think you can help, you don't just jump into their space and start giving advice.
Or worse, interfering with them.
Yeah. So voyeurism, we have abilities as we work with these abilities and develop them. Some people are psychic, some people see auras, some people just know things. You don't go there into somebody else's space and interfere with it energetically. A, unless you have permission and you've asked. And B, there is a difference. This question came up recently as Nina went out on the road and is traveling, and we, reminded her about pogging. So if everyone in this room were to take a moment and hold space for Nina, she may feel an energetic influx from us coming in. But we're not going into her space. We're not trying to see through her and see what she's doing, or be part of something that we're not part of. So just don't go there. We talked about drive-by healings. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So when we hold space, aren't we just basically holding the light and supporting them?
Yeah, we're gonna.
Well, we have a whole slide on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But is there a specific question?
With respect to Nina,
Uh-huh.
and so my thought, my curiosity was, if we're holding space, we're not really holding them back,
Right.
because we're not interfering with what they're doing.
And we're holding the space here for her. We're not projecting space there. We're not sending things. Think of pogging more like a radar ping. We're sending out a ping to remember Nina, to remember Will, to remember, Maria, and even Kent and Karen, because they're part of the school. So we need to keep sending out those little radar pings, and we don't know on their end if they're like, oh, I haven't thought about the school before, or remember that student from the school, or whatever. But we're not going in and spying on them to say, okay, well, why aren't they here? And, what are they really doing? And, those kind of things. So support versus interference. And that's when you've asked and when you've been given permission. is to do more. So, and then remember to honor the path of another person. So if someone, especially if someone has chosen a path, I mean, I can throw out all sorts of really cool things that I learned on my path, but is that going to distract you from your path? It's just like last night I was brushing up on one of the exercises that I wanted to do with you today, and I was like, oh wow, well there's this one, or they could all read, if they all read this book, this would be really good for them, you know. Maybe not, but it's not part of the Toltec path. Maybe it got me where I am now, but it's not like I still use that path. So why would I push it on you? So remember that when somebody is engaged in a spiritual path, that you want to honor that. And if you do need to give spiritual advice or even physical advice, temper it for that person and their beliefs. You know, this is not a judgment, but there's certain things you do and don't want to do if you're helping the Catholic. You know, there's certain things that are going to push them over the edge, and there's other things that are going to help make them comfortable. And so, you know, it's a strict religious upbringing that in one case you need to at least honor the fact that they grew up that way, whether they're following it or not. And that could be part of their hot buttons, and it doesn't mean you get to push them.
No,
Yes.
that's my job.
Yeah.
Say, for example, that you know somebody that they're on a path, and yes, you're honoring their path, but say somebody's in their on the same path that's interfering with that person's true will, and you're a good friend of them.
We can talk more about specifics if you want afterwards.
No, I'm just throwing
but-
something out.
Yeah, no, I mean there's a lot of things to consider, but one thing is if two people are on the same path, is that what you're saying?
Say the teacher doesn't have the highest for the student.
Okay, so you think they're on a bad path.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
just saying, say that it's doing harm to that
Right.
person.
Yeah, well, you know, the best you can do is speak from your higher self to their higher self. And
I would say ask a question and then plant the seed that if they wanted to talk more about it, that you would be happy to talk to them. But
the thing is, there's a lot of people, and there's people outside the school right now who are knocking on the door, but they never open the door and come in. You know, so at some point it has to be their will to walk on the door. And
Yeah,
and they may even not even get to the point of knocking on the door yet. They might just keep saying, I'm going to go knock on that door, but they don't do it. So if someone's caught in you know something that you believe is pulling them off base, first of all, if you're on a path and you have a teacher, I would talk to your teacher to get
Okay.
advice on best how to handle it.
Okay.
They may just tell you it's none of your business. They may give you, you know, a few things to try, but you still have to remember you have to honor them because they're on a path.
Right.
And yeah.
so like when I was going through, this was many years ago now, when I was going through my spontaneous transition into level 4, you've heard me describe some of the physical things I was going through. Well, that was a path and a change that I had invoked. I had deliberately said, I've gone down this path, and that's what happened. I can't tell you the number of people who kept giving me advice, usually unsolicited, on how to make all that stop. When in fact, stopping it would have been the worst thing for me. So, no, it's you really have to honor the path of another. And in most cases, I wasn't even asking for help. People would comment, oh gee, what's going on with you? Why are you doing, oh, I'm doing this spiritual thing and I've got all this stuff going on. Oh, well, quick, ground out, make it stop. No, I don't want your advice. You just asked what was going on. That's what's going on. So you just have to honor that.
So basically, you know, when you do what you can, and then you have to move on. You know,
Right.
it doesn't mean that you can't even keep a feeler out for that person so that when they are actually ready to move upon, you know, and make a change, that you're there to help them.
Yeah, because then you're interfering with their true will, right?
Right. Right. So, any other questions on ethics? All right.
Try it. It should be going. There you go.
Okay, so grounding. I thought this was an interesting quote. Some of you may not know Gurdjieff. Nietzsche? How do you say Nietzsche? Anyway, yeah, there's several spiritualists that come from Eastern Europe who have a different approach to things, and some of that is under the heading of what's called the Fourth Way. And it's another more, I think, modern psychological way of talking about some of the spiritual phenomenon and experiences that we have.
The Fourth Way is the system invented by Gurdjieff, or rediscovered by Gurdjieff. And up until that time, it was always considered, there's 3 paths to spiritual enlightenment. There's the path of the mystic, there's the path of the esotericist, there's a path of this, and then Gurdjieff came along and said, no, there's a 4th way. Well, everything he teaches in the 4th way is exactly what we teach in the Toltec path. So the Toltecs were doing 4th way stuff eons before Gurdjieff ever came along. But we like Gurdjieff, we like what he teaches. Some of his students I'm less happy with, just kind of like Christianity. So,
Can you read the quote?
it is only by grounding our awareness in the living sensation of our bodies, that the I am, our real presence, can awaken. You have to link, what this is saying is you have to link your essence with your biological machine. And then the biological machine has to be placed under the control of the essence, and then you can be awakened, and then you can do your true will. So it's the same language Coyote uses, the same language EJ uses, the same language I use. And Gurdjieff is cool. We like Gurdjieff.
So when we talk about grounding, there's two ways to look at this. Let's look at it from more of an energetic standpoint, that when we are using energy, it's going down the right side and up the left if we create that circuit, right? Otherwise, what is it doing? What does electricity do? What is a lightning bolt? What do we need to keep lightning bolt from hurting us?
Oh, you have to ground.
Ground it.
We need a grounding rod. We need something that goes to ground, right? So that energy is just going to ground out, right? A lightning bolt is going to ground unless we redirect the energy. So if you have somebody who is completely spiritually unaware, and you stop at an accident scene on the freeway and people are running around hysterical, you're ultimately trying to get them to ground out their energy. Get them back to ground. You know, get them on ground, because they're up here and they're, oh my God, everything's like way up here, and we need to bring it back down to ground. So when you're talking to somebody, when you have a client, when you yourself find yourself up here, you've cut yourself off from your ground. Okay? And so in that way, there needs to always be a polarity. You're keeping, and this is where most of humanity is missing, they've got the physical ground that we're on, and then they start raising their vibration and they're going out all over the place into the universe because they don't have a celestial point that they're connected with. If everything is always done with that connection between the heavens and the earth, then you have this clear conduit that you're basically sliding up and down in as you raise and lower your vibration. If you don't have those two polarities there, then you're going to be, and you get ungrounded, then you're floating out in the universe. And you may never come back. So with that analogy then, we aren't trying to ground out. We're not trying to disconnect ourselves or stay on planet Earth all the time. We are attempting to navigate in the higher realms. Or we're being called to navigate the higher realms. We're being called in the dreaming to navigate these certain things. So what we are really doing is keeping those polarities in check and recirculating the energy. So we don't want to be grounding out our energy, but we do want to reconnect to ground. Do you see the difference? So when you find yourself or someone else starting to freak out or to lose ground, first question you want to ask yourself is, am I awake? Okay, so that's a call, and you know, everyone watching should understand what the waking state is now. Has anybody noticed Sarah and her eyes today? She's awake. She's here. There's somebody behind those eyes that isn't always here. So she's been working on stuff. And she's got a different presence about her because she's been working on stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And so what that means is we're talking more to essence rather than to human biological machine to machine. So are you awake? Okay, that's for you as a practitioner, really. Are you awake? And then you want to make sure that the person that you're working with is awake to the best of their ability. This is why they get slapped in the face. This is why when you have a hysterical person that gets slapped, you have to bring them back awake because they're caught up in this drama. I'm not recommending slapping people, but
Well,
you know,
see that in the movies.
there is the spiritual slap in the face.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you know, stuff goes across your Facebook feed and you just kind of eye roll and you keep going and but at some point you have to say no, and you have to call people on their bullshit.
Yeah.
You know, and so so that's the awakening part. You know, in whatever way you can, you have to be awake. Your client has to be awake, and then your question is, okay, am I grounded or not? Is this person grounded? So very commonly, somebody might get up off the massage table and not be grounded. All right. So then, what do you do about it? So for you as a student, you want to get to your place of power, which means first draining everything that's not, you know, that's inhibiting you, bringing your attention to those things. So you might go inward immediately and say, oh wow, my heart's racing and I got veins bulging out of my neck and this isn't good. I need to physically get myself centered again. And then there's the idea of the social mask, okay? Is part of this drama that's going on. Let's say you're having an argument with your spouse, all right? This is somebody you love. Right now, you're not talking to them essence to essence. You're attacking each other's egos. And so when you can wake up in that moment and remind your partner to wake up in that moment and ask yourself, are you grounded? Or in this case, what might be pushing my buttons, you know? And then get yourself quickly, because remember, we need to be able to get to our place of power like that. And realize that we've got a social mask on. That we're taking the, poor abused housewife mask right now, or that we're putting on the warrior bitch mask, or you're not going to step on my whatever mask. And we all have those that we've developed subconsciously. A mask can be an important thing for shape-shifting and for navigating out there, but It needs to be conscious and consciously created. And when we find ourselves slipping into those masks, then we realize, wow, we're not in our place of power. So the biggest thing that can diffuse an argument is dropping the social masks. And the person there who's raging and fuming at you has nothing to bounce off of, because you're not giving them anything. You know, you're just there, and hopefully admitting love, you know, and trying to, because you've now become awake, you've now got grounded, you've now got to your place of power, and you can speak with love.
Right. The place of power is key. We spent a lot of time earlier on teaching everyone the 3 core pieces of the Toltec version of getting to your place of power. And we expect you to do that often. Be able to go there in an instant. Get to your place of power. Then you go help the people at the car accident who are freaking out. And I've done that many times in my life. People just wigging out. It's incredible some of the stupid things people do when they're in that panic state. You know, they'll try to run across 6 lanes of a freeway, chasing a stupid dog that got out of the car during the accident, and they'll ignore bleeding people. They'll ignore the safety to themselves because they're not grounded. They don't know how to. So yeah, you've got to be the calm in the storm.
So the next thing on here is opening and closing fields. So some of these now are going to actually be, what can you do to help yourself and someone else in a moment to ground? You know, we're not all there yet where we can get to our place of power. We're not all there yet where in any given situation we can, you know, to do those other steps. So what can we do? So one thing that you need to know, and so all of you, I'd like you to try this just right now, is first ground in the way, the reason we put both feet on the ground when we're doing energy exercises and so forth is so that we're not short-circuiting things by crossing our legs and so forth. But there's a lot of different reasons why we do that. And more of an erect posture, you know, so that you're aligning with gravity and kind of sensing, feeling. Now get to your place of power. And you should be able to do this now with taking a few deep breaths. Make sure that the Akadwa is activated. Now, in your own mind, I want you to push one of your own buttons. Something that when somebody says something a certain way or they've done something to you, that you can start to feel that hurt. And feel what it starts to do within your body. It's lowering your vibration. So when we find ourselves off base, whether it's high or low, whether we're up there and ungrounded or whether we're depressed and just disconnected, by closing off our fields, bringing your arms in around your body, you hold that energy in that you have and you can start rebuilding it. And when you open yourself up and let in the sun energy, solar energy into the heart, there's a raising of the vibration. There's a filling. You are more vulnerable. You can be hurt in this direction. But right now you're recharging your battery. You're bringing in more energy. And it's lifting you up. Now bring it back in and contain it and recirculate it. Can you feel that the energy now has come down?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not diminished. It's not grounded out. And here you can hold it and build it. And do that one more time. Open way up. And just you're sensing and feeling, especially in your solar plexus and your lower chakras. And let those fill with the solar energy. And can you feel yourself lifting? Now bring it back in. Hold it, nurture it. And store that energy in what's called your lower dantian, which is roughly where your sacral chakra is. And then ask yourself where you're at as far as your energy levels. Do you feel vulnerable, depressed, or ungrounded, dizzy, unconnected? Any comments?
It's neutral.
Neutral. And that's where you want to be. That's kind of like middle pillar, right? You could go any way. And so the idea was to bring us back down after being up. And sometime in the privacy of your own home, you can do that same exercise. When you're doing this, let go of ground. And you'll feel yourself starting to fly. Which might be fun for a few minutes until you realize that you're off balanced and dizzy and things. So it's not that we're physically on ground, but we're keeping that energetic connection. So part of our second intention, whenever we're in these situations, should be both on that solar source and on the ground. And then we can hover wherever we want in between that. But we don't want to be just out there. So mudras. This is the most common one to block off your fields. So it's again closing. So if you're in a conversation and you're talking to somebody who's being completely irrational and you just need to stand there and take it because you can't run away screaming or you can't beat them into the ground, take this posture and just to the best you can connect with from your higher self to their higher self whenever you speak or receive anything that they have to give. So this is one that you're going to see commonly when you look at pictures of ascended masters and ancient art, is you're going to see them in these different positions. This is another kind of powerful mudra. So it's the same one in different positions, but they have different effects. So mudras is something that comes to us from the term, from the Hindu practices, but at the same time, every culture has gang symbols, right, that we can use to A, signal to another person, or B, create a specific effect. What is that one, Shuriel?
This one is basically linking heaven and earth.
So yeah, you see Christ a lot of times doing this, Even on some of the tarot cards, I can't remember if it's the Nine of Swords or something, the guy's like dead on his belly with all these swords in his back, and yet he's throwing us a symbol, So there's symbols are everywhere. You just need to know what they are. What's that?
The 10.
It's the 10?
It's the 10.
Okay, yeah, I was like, that's close. So, and then obsidian, okay, so we have the Akadiwa, use it. Let's all, just as an experiment, bring out the energy by bringing in unnamed. So we're all going to connect to unnamed, and bring up the frequency as high as you can possibly bring it. And now, almost just like pouring Pepto-Bismol over that whole picture that in your mind, bring in a wash of obsidian and bring it down slowly, slowly, slowly to the ground. And I always give it an extra little push, just like I'm connecting deep down into the ground. Did you notice the energies within yourself coming down with that wash? We're not ungrounded. And we haven't disconnected to source either. It's still there. The unnamed, you can still kind of feel it tingling in your third eye and crown. But the overall energy then got a wash of obsidian over it. You see how different those two energies are. And so this is part of the combinations of playing with the different frequencies and what you can do with it. So let's say that we were doing some kind of an ecstatic dance thing and we get everybody all wound up and they're like floating off the planet. We don't want to ground them out, but we can then wash the space with obsidian to bring us all back down now to a point where we can refocus and work together. So they're not in contradiction. Okay, so anything else on grounding? Ready? Not.
I'm wondering about that battery.
What?
I'm wondering about that battery.
Oh, it's just.
I'll change it when we go on lunch break.
Okay, so we had some instruction on altars when you were at the level 4. So this is from the Lesser Banishment Ritual of the Pentagram. This quote: "In the column stands the 6th rayed star." So here again we have an image showing us the Kabbalic Tree of Life. We have it superimposed on the background of the universe and these starlights coming through. And a lot of people think of the Sephiroth as actually being lights, and in almost a similar way to the chakras being lights within our own body. And so we're going to see some more sacred geometry here coming up where I'll be able to expand upon this a little bit. But essentially, we are working many different levels at one time. And we need to know why and when we're going to set an altar. There's all sorts of different altars. There's going to be different types of altars for different traditions. That doesn't mean that because you learned it one way and now you're being asked to do it a different way. It's simply, we could be trying to accomplish a completely different thing. And so the altar then needs to follow the tradition that you're working in. Yes?
The one thing I want to make sure people understand, which is actually quite physics-based, which is when you create an altar with an intent and you activate it, you're basically opening a portal to the higher planes, where you're invoking certain energies to come in and create an effect on the space, on the people there, in the larger world. That's what an altar is. It's an interdimensional portal. When you understand it from that point of view, everything else will make a lot more sense.
So don't get confused between an altar and a shrine. A shrine is where you're paying devotion to, a number of different maybe deities or aspects, and so you have honored those in some way. And so, for example, our Buddha altar out in the front yard is kind of a shrine. It's an old stump that's hollowed out that has a Buddha statue on it. But there's all sorts of sacred objects that have been put inside of it and built up around it. It's something that, you know, visitors to our farm have contributed to. It's places where I have released old altar items to the wild again because I have too many of them and I tend to be an altar whore. And so we have boxes up in the attic of rocks, and it's like, I don't even know where they came from. So I'm just releasing them to the wild, and in this case, I'm putting a lot of them around the Buddha altar. So that's a shrine, not necessarily an altar, even though we call it a Buddha altar, because we do then activate it and use it at different times. But all the objects around it are more shrine-like. And so the tendency is to start collecting stuff that's meaningful to us. And that's really important. We want to collect things that are meaningful to us, especially if they came to us in a sacred way. If we were gifted something, if a feather was found on the pathway that we were trotting. Those are all, you know, sacred gifts, and they came to us in a sacred way, and we always want to honor those in one way or another. And I'm going to be showing you a few things in just a minute, and one of them in particular is something that it's a wand, and it's something that was gifted to me by somebody who I no longer associate with, and for over 10 years I've had this wand, which I like. I think it's cool, but I've never found a way that I'm guided to use it yet. So it's been on my altar, my kind of basic altar, all this time, collecting energy, and potentially at some point it will be called into service. So the basic altar then is something that is make a difference between a shrine-like altar of things that motivate you or hold space or whatever purpose you set for creating that altar, between what we're going to call a working altar. And a working altar is something that you're using for a specific purpose at a specific time with specific things, and it's going to be used in a ritual sense or a ceremonial sense. It's going to be used to open that porthole. And in that way, you want to be very careful that you are both opening and closing these altars, because they otherwise it's a interdimensional porthole that you just left open. So you really need to realize that they're powerful, that they do work, and they will work better with conscious intention and attention, which means not letting them become junk collectors and full of dust and, you know, sitting stagnant. We'll talk a little bit about feng shui when we get to the creating a space. But you do need to create a space and maintain it, and if you can't, it's better that you close it. So a lot of times, like on discussion night, we'll set an altar, and it will be there specifically for the space. But if it's intricate in any way, I will deassemble it at the end, because otherwise those pieces become desecrated by little kids checking them or whatever. I'd be like, I need my water. I need my water.
Oh, this is water? I thought our well water was better than that.
So, let me move on to the 4 elements. So, we're in a Malkuthian world. We have what we have before us to work with. There's higher dimensional things that we will learn how to work with. But it's kind of like the 4-year-old who throws out 1, 2, 3s because they want to learn trigonometry. You really have to have those foundational pieces, and the earth is part of our foundation. It's our polar point that we're working with. And to throw out that and everything that's come down to us through the ages about how that works simply because we don't deem it to be fifth dimensional, and it's a lower vibration, or it's deemed to be satanic or occultish or whatever label you want to put on it, is simply a fear-based response. It's like cutting off your body from the knees down because you don't see the purpose of legs anymore. So we need to get through this environment that we're working in, and the four elements are key to that. So earth, fire, water, air. Now the order that you say that in is specific. It's telling you how you're going to be working your altar. And it makes a particular design based off of how you work with it. So the four elements are, in every single culture, you're going to see that used. In the Asian cultures, they add a fifth, which is metal, and it doesn't necessarily equate to spirit. So it's just a different system. It doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means that you don't try to combine systems. Everybody wants to make all of these things overlap, and they don't necessarily when you get down to the ritual aspect of it. I mean, they're all aspects of the higher configuration that we've been talking about. But the individual rituals should be done. It's like me saying, well, I'm going to make you guys cookies today, but, I'm going to use this Asian recipe to make, cowboy cookies.
Another way to think of it, specifically the Asian 5-element system versus the more Western 4-element system, is think of it as being, in a way, the difference between using English units and metric units. There are different ways of getting the same job done, and you really need to pick a method and stick with it. Because it can be very complicated. There's not always a one-to-one correspondence between the metal element and anything in the 4 elements that we have. And if you get really careless at unit conversions, you can take your Mars Observer spacecraft and crash it into Mars and throw $250 million down, actually it was more, about $500 million down the drain, and 5 years of preparation just because you trusted a low-level engineer to convert units and nobody checked his work. And it's a very basic fundamental skill. It should have been easy, and it wasn't. So know the system you're working and why. So the 4 elements are usually assigned, as she's about to mention, to the 4 directions and correspond to 4 colors. Not even every Native American tradition uses the same correspondences as other Native American traditions. And the colors that we've taught are the ones we use in the Toltec system, and they're there for a very specific reason. If you're going to go to a different system and use their system, just know why you're doing it.
So he said the 4 elements are connected to the 4 directions, but that's still only in specific situations, as we're going to see in a few minutes. But the 4 directions are key to this plane of existence. So the 4 directions don't necessarily apply when we move into another dimension. So they don't always necessarily, connect, except for the work you're doing physically. If you're doing physical work on the earth, then it's good to keep in mind the directions. Okay, so I mentioned about a working altar. So there's things we're going to talk about that are in a basic altar, and then the idea of a working altar, which really means that you're going to do something with that. So let's say a basic altar at home is going to have the 4 elements, earth, fire, water, air, set in the 4 directions. That's about as basic as it gets. However, that said, we can mess with that. The other day I was asked to set an altar for the discussion on the chessboard. And one thing that threw me off right away is that it's evenly divided. So there wasn't really a good way for me to center it. If I was to place pieces right on the center of the on each square, I couldn't really center a north, south, east, west thing. So I have this like, you know, triangle that I was trying to create, and ultimately what I did was I just kind of shifted it like that. And there was two elements that I was asked to have work more strongly. So those two then were kind of working in conjunction this way, and these two were kind of holding space in another way. So you don't always know where and when you're going to need to create an altar. And you may have to do it with found objects, or, you know, you may not have water. You may not be able to have water just simply because of where it's at. There's many times that we try to create an altar that can't have fire. You know, like at an event, at a convention or something like that. You know, you can't have live flames. So how do you make an altar? What's going to represent fire? So we don't need to belabor any of this unless you guys have any specific questions. We'll answer some of these as we go along. But a working altar then is when you are actually putting that together for a specific purpose, and then you're going to do something with it. And this usually involves the alchemist or the magician or the shaman or whoever it is working as an invocant who's going to be bringing something in. So they kind of need to know what they're doing. That's that right-hand pillar energy coming in, right? We're creating a space so something can come in. At the same time, we got to contain that space, and we got to make sure that we don't leak anything out or bring anything in, or we need to make sure that we protect the thing that we brought in. So let's put that into practical terms. What does that really mean? You're a massage therapist. You're going to have a client coming over. You're prepping your room. You want to make sure that you are in a good, safe spiritual space and that your client is. So you do some kind of banishment or invocation or something on your space to clear out any negative energies and to set up what you do want in there. And so in that case, you've created a space now where you can have a direct connection to your guides, and you can bring something higher in while you're working with this person. At the same time, the room can get really crowded if you are, you know, into every single deity, and you have to have your whole pantheon support people there, and you call in, you know, all of the guides and protectors of this particular person, and you have a higher obligation then to have a good created space because you're calling in more stuff. You are the invocant at that point. So at the same time, we want to be releasing stuff and sending it back. And so the role of the priestess and the priest, which don't have to be male or female, it's just simply the role you're bringing, the invocant and the temple attendant, is that you're creating that space that something can be held. And it's a horribly important job to create that space and make sure it's safe, so that when the invocant brings something into it, you don't have things falling apart. So, with all that in mind, you want to have a purpose when you're doing a working altar. It needs to be an intent, and you need to work with attention. And that starts with the cleansing and the consecration of both the space and the tools or the things that you're going to bring into it. And a consecrated item is usually going to be something that's only consecrated for one purpose, and it's used for that one purpose, and it would only be done once. But you could potentially consecrate like we did our labyrinth, kind of, is a term that we could apply to that. Once we get it's not finished, it needs a lot more work on an aesthetic value, but on an energetic level, we have certain things set, and it's consecrated for a specific purpose, and that's what it should be used for.
So your main altar pieces that you acquired, like something to represent earth, air, fire, and water. Maybe you have a little cauldron that you burn candles in, a different thing that you burn incense in, and so forth. By consecrating them, you're dedicating them to that use. You're not ever going to say, oh, hey, I need to go transplant a pot. I'm going to grab my consecrated altar bowl and use that temporarily and then just rinse it out and put it back into use. It's like, you consecrate it, you leave it for that use only, and you don't use it for mundane tasks.
And so the last thing I have listed here is temporary altars. Which can be a lot of, like let's say you hike up on the mountain and you get to a little special space and you want to create a little altar while you're there working on something. What's the first thing you should do? This is a test.
Oh, I know.
Well, you cleanse
Cleanse
the
it.
space.
What'd you say?
Cleansing.
Consecrate. Any other ideas?
I know.
Ask permission.
Ask
Yay,
permission.
ding, ding, ding.
Ask permission.
Ask
Okay,
permission.
you are no longer in Kansas, Dorothy. So, we always need to ask permission. And you might have some great, wonderful idea, like releasing the Maori spirits or something, but you don't do anything without asking permission. You've in this house, we've claimed this space. We asked for permission before we got here. We asked permission from the forest and from the land to be able to be here and to work. And in exchange for that, we protect the land and the land protects us. So then we had permission to set beacons on the property that would help protect the space. We have permission to be doing our banishments and stuff. We don't need to ask that anymore because we've claimed and are protecting and have a reciprocal arrangement with the space. But if I climb over the fence into Joe's yard, and I start doing a banishment ritual, if I don't get shot by Joe, she's like this 90-year-old woman who would do such a thing, I might get attacked by a rabid squirrel that says, what the hell, chick, this is my space.
Alright.
So, you have to ask for permission when you're going out and doing stuff out there. And in that particular case, you might have to use found items. You might have to create something, right there, or you can start learning to bring basic altar items with you. Do I always have earth, fire, air on me? Is there something even that represents spirit? Yes.
So some of you attended the thing we did up on the mountain last year. Remember that? We had Shawnee Day.
Right.
We went up to Ascension Rock, and then we went to Sand Flat. Before I did any of that, I made a previous trip earlier that week up there to specifically commune with the elementals and the other spirits on the mountain that some of them I know, some of them I don't. I have a relationship with many of them. And to do two things. One was ask permission, and two was get their help and assistance to make that possible. So when I went in and I taught you how to activate medicine wheels and we did all that stuff up there, I had already asked permission. You didn't see me do it that day because it would have been kind of dumb to get there and ask permission and get the answer of no.
You're right.
So I went up 4 days ahead of time, asked permission, got a yes, here's how we do it, and then we did what we were going to do. So you have to do that.
What is the next slide?
Hang on. It's samples of altars.
Okay.
You want to see it?
Let's just go to that one, yeah. So, this is obviously not my artwork. It belongs to sagegoddess.com, but I thought it was a cool image. So here's a really good example of where someone has, for their own demented purposes, put an arrangement of elements together for their specific purpose, which isn't necessarily how we would think of a basic altar. In the center, I like the image because in the center, again, it shows the flower of life. kind of connecting, showing how all this stuff connects in together. What they've done specifically in this particular case is to arrange air and fire close together, fire and earth, earth and water, water and air, which for the purpose of looking at these other aspects on the outside, right? So I'll show you in a minute what that looks like when they put it together more in an altar set, or in another bubble sense. But the point is there is a lot of overlap, and there is things that complement each other and work together. It's kind of like that rock paper scissors game. Which one wins? Well, it depends on the situation, right? So I like this picture or this image to say that there is no right or wrong way to make an altar as long as you're doing it with conscious intent. So in this particular case, maybe I have this card, this image that I picked up, on my trip to the coast last week, and it's invoking all sorts of things that I want to be working with right now in this particular moment. That's all you need is the darn card or anything that's going to help trigger you to, focus your intention. Now, they have some other things here. They have some, candles and stones and different things that would theoretically meet that obligation of the 4 elements. And it's all kind of holding space in a nice little feng shui way for this card, right? The card looks nice the way it's set. It's intentionally placed there. That's all you need to be doing to really set an altar and do a working altar to do what you need to do. I'm flipping pages.
Hang on. Just don't do anything. This mouse is just not...
Do you need a mouse pad?
I have one.
Oh.
Okay, now you can flip pages.
So in this example then, this is related to what we were just looking at, where they had put the elements in these configurations and superimposed it then on the seed of life.
Flower of life.
That's not the flower, actually. That's the seed.
Oh, okay.
There's a difference in the geometric designs, but they're basically similar. These are the ones that look like little flowers as opposed to circles. So you see all of this interconnectedness with these things that are going on. They, in particular, and this is related to that last image that we were looking at, have a purpose as to why they want to talk about these things or use these elements in that configuration, and that's fine. Those are the elements that are here on Earth. They're working with something that's here on Earth, and they're trying to fit that idea into their understanding of the structure of the universe for whatever dimension purpose they may be doing that. It's okay. And so then you see this further reflected back down here. What they're trying to show is a masculine activity versus a feminine activity. So they've put air and fire together, creating a warmth. They've put fire and earth together, creating dry. They've put water and earth, creating cold. They've put water and air to create moist. This is a really good diagram of thinking about how to work with the Akadua subfrequencies. It doesn't have to correspond to any specific thing. That's why when we were looking at we haven't got to the elemental table yet, but that X that was
It's
in
next.
Malkuth, that was in the bottom of the Tree of Life, had the X because that's part of the working system. You need the X so that you can figure out your coordinates in whatever you're trying to arrange it with, and you can place these elements in a way to create the desired results. Okay? So, this is a Wiccan altar. It has a very specific way it needs to be set up. It has very specific tools that would be used or insinuated that you would need to have in order to do a true Wiccan altar. each thing on here is going to have a different level of significance. It's not necessarily set up north, south, east, west. It probably has a good representative of all of the elements, but it's not necessarily set up like we would think with north, south, east, west, and the each of the elements in those directions. So these start to get a lot more complicated. This is an example. These are all examples of working altars, where you decide why you're setting it up the way you're setting it up. Okay. So these symbols again are part of the sacred geometry. They're part of the sacred alchemical periodical table that's been used since medieval times. They're things that are used commonly in astrology and different things where we want to just use a symbol really quick. Instead of saying air, we want to just, have the air symbol. So there's a whole shorthand here that if you're good at art at all, if you're right-brained at all, then these images are going to speak to you more than the words or the concepts will, because they speak volumes. They say more than I can possibly say about them. So, next.
Yeah, go.
Okay. This is a very simplified alchemical table. I have a more detailed one on my computer, but you see here are the 4 elements plus the plus sign. That's that cross that we need. You can't just have these elements randomly floating about. You need to put them into some kind of axis configuration, X and Y, or in the case of the pictures, or those bubbles that we were looking at that were superimposed on the tree of life. It's tree of life. The flower, the seed of the flower, the seed of flower. Those were those were using the flower as its access points. Axis, not access. Axis. AXIS. So we have to have some way of knowing and navigating where we're at. Otherwise, we're just out there floating around. So that's an important reason that's on the periodical table. Now, these 3 principles of sulfur, salt, and mercury. Just a really quick alchemical history. At some point, we started using these base metals and solvents, or activation chemicals, with the theory that we could make gold, let's say, out of a base metal. And when you study alchemy, you get a lot of this kind of terminology. And all of it is code for the higher work. All of it when you're thinking as above, so below, think about the fact that we're not turning base metals into gold. We're turning human biological machines into gods. So all of the symbolism in the esoteric world is going to be speaking to that on some level. It's going to be speaking to how we got here and how we get back. What is the process for transforming ourselves? And because during the same period of time, you could be executed for saying such a thing, it's encoded in this alchemical language. So the quicker you get past any fear, superstition, or any of that of this alchemical language, realize that it was hidden and put into this kind of terminology to preserve it so that eyes can see and ears can hear, and they can learn and achieve and gain knowledge.
Yeah, this was at a day where if you had this table hanging in your house, you could get burned at the stake just because you had it. So physicians and chemists and scientists were allowed to do what they do as long as they didn't cross that line into spiritual work. So they pretended to just be playing with chemicals, and the language they used was a code, basically, to hide this other knowledge.
So sulfur in particular, do you all know what sulfur looks like? It's the bright yellow crystalline structure. It's really toxic. You don't want to eat it. But just running your hands over the top of it will break a static charge of the energy. So like if you're a massage therapist, having a big piece of sulfur sitting there, so that even if you can't wash your hands every 5 minutes, you can just run them over the sulfur and break the charge. I was talking to Yanesh from EJ's group recently about all the functions of the super beacon. And you remember how there's those two little probes sticking up, and it had the little pieces of tourmaline in them? Does the same thing. You run your hand through that to break those electrical charges that build up. So salt and mercury, mercury is probably one of our most toxic substances, and yet at the same time it has all sorts of phenomenal types of uses. But again, remember that all of these are as above, so below. There is a real chemical activation that happens by using these. There are also energetic activations that happen by invoking these, or to understand them, their higher purpose, and how you use them in doing ritual.
Another class.
Oh yeah, this is a sampler class. You also notice that you have the planets and the metals that are cross-correspond. That way, at some point it was legal to talk about astrology. Astrology used to be part of the sciences. And so by cross-referencing it, you could be using what somebody thought was a planet symbol, and it also had a cross-reference to all of these different chemicals. And so all of these chemicals then also have a correspondence to higher level principles, which, yes, is another class. So that's the elemental table. I wanted you to just see clearly that these symbols keep coming up over and over again. We saw a lot of these symbols on the Tree of Life in that first diagram on the various paths, because it represents the correspondences to astrology. So as you start to understand correspondences, you're going to start seeing more. Maybe, like, for example, Patty knows the Tarot. So she may not understand any of this. It might all be completely Greek to her. But when she looks at the correspondence table, which is in your handouts, so your handouts have extra correspondence tables that you can study in your own time for your own demented purposes. But she can look then and see, oh, well, I know this tarot card very well. I know what it means. Oh, yeah, I can see now how it's just like this. Because a lot of that work's already been done for us. All right, any questions on the elemental table?
This is the correspondence table right here?
There's a couple of them in there, yeah. There's a couple tables, and they're all correspondences to the Tree of Life with other esoteric systems. Basically, any 32-path system or 22-path system will have some type of a correspondence to the Tree of Life. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sacred tools.
Pause.
Yeah.
Who knows what that image is?
That's a thing that...
Oh. That was quick.
The owl gives it away. Okay, so I was supposed to do a demonstration for the altar, and I wanted to have us all maybe take a 5-minute break if you need to use the restroom or anything. We are going to break for lunch from like 1 to 2. But I do need to get some things out of the bedroom to...
Okay, so everybody online, we're taking a short breakage.
I need to probably maybe use that table just for this so that I can put
Yeah, I was
stuff
gonna
in an
suggest
area
that.
where the camera can see it.
This is very curious. Yeah, bring that right over here.
Roughly here.
Yeah, that's good. We'll line it up like that. And I'm kind of curious to see what happens to this camera when it's not looking at the screen. Well, it's getting a little of it. Turn this off. And this on. Yeah. You know, I think I figured out that it's not interference. There's the polarization effect of the light coming off that screen that
Oh.
these are picking up on, and that's what's creating
Oh,
it.
it's
So,
getting the rainbow of it. Makes sense.
yeah.
Well, that's a bit of a physics thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Great artwork that you picked. I would love to
Oh, yeah.
have
I had
a
fun
picture of all the artwork.
Yeah, I
Just
had
like,
fun doing
whoa!
that because there was, you know, it was just like that's how I see things, and I always do art things. Like here, you know, prepare for the level 4 intensive. It's like, okay, I gotta do something.
That's a good question. It's a woman.
Yeah.
It has a dog, a greyhound at its feet. Who is that?
She is that.
You'll have to have fun. You found that at a yard sale or a thrift shop somewhere and you go, wow, this is significant.
It's
for
I'm
us."
pretty sure that it's probably one of the wives of King Henry VIII. When you go to Westminster Abbey and some of the other abbeys in England, they, you know, for a fee, you can do a brass rubbing. So they'll have, like, you can do full-size ones if they have a sarcophagus or something. They lay out paper and then you just rub chalk all over it and then you're taking an impression. So that's what that is. Somebody
It's
did that in
gorgeous.
England, brought it here. I bought it at an antique store
That
here
was
in
the
town.
score, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was like nobody. I mean, who would have a place for that or want it? You know, other than me.
And you knew what it was when you saw it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I can just tell by the costuming what era it is.
Yeah.
And
Who is she?
I think it's one of the wives of Henry VIII. But it's
Well,
definitely
then it's
from,
not
it's from that
accurate.
era. What?
It doesn't show the head missing.
Right.
I know, right?
All lose their heads.
Okay.
Excuse me, but Henry VIII I am, Henry VIII I am. I did something with the widow next door. She's been married 7 times before. Herman and the Hermits. Everybody loves Henry. Henry! Henry VIII I am.
So I can't remember which classes you had been to.
That's the one I took with Dennis, actually. I don't know if it was there, but,
I don't think so.
Marissa.
Well, I haven't seen any evidence that Will's online.
He has to work today.
He told me yesterday that he was going to be watching.
Yeah, he woke up this morning and his aunt came in the room and said,
So I figured out what the problem is.
Yeah.
It's the polarization of light coming off of the screen that is causing the interference, which whichever camera is looking at it.
Uh-huh.
So this method is not a good method for the future.
So it's not like, I was wondering if the camera needed to be behind the projector. Didn't do it. Yeah, I think it's interesting because every once in a while, when you have the projector going, it's like you'll just glance at it really quick and turn your head and you can see all the rainbow colors. And it's just like when you're looking at it, you don't see them, but out of your peripheral vision, you can actually see them.
I took a short video of one part when you had it on the screen because it looked like there was, I don't know what it looked like, but it was rainbow and it would almost look like a genie coming out of a lamp
really?
or something. I was like, what are we talking about that's happening?
I
And
remember
it wasn't the whole screen, it was just this little thing.
I remember the first time we broadcast from Liv's place at the Celestine Center, and I'm looking at it going, what the hell am I seeing? It was just like the whole thing was going, and it was, we had an altar in there. It was the smoke coming up from the altar was causing, it wasn't even the smoke, it was the heat waves.
I remember seeing that when I was
Yeah.
at the Celestine Center. I think it was doing that the last time we had this class there.
I got your toes. I can't.
Be an obnoxious guy up there wanting to make music and stuff.
No, you're standing in the
I've
hall.
never noticed your skylights before, that's very cool.
The what?
Okay. The skylights up there?
Oh,
Very
Yeah.
cool looking. I guess mostly because we come
you
at
come at
night.
night. You want anything?
I'm waiting to get in there.
Okay. That's not the
Because
answer to the
I
question.
can't set up my thing until I'm gone, so. Yes, Yvonne is in there. Oh, here, let me pass this around. You guys can start looking at it. This is like a full periodic table, alchemical periodic table. And this is where I had started using this symbol here. Hold on. Here. For the causal consciousness stuff. And I didn't even know what it meant. And then when I looked it up, and wow, it had a lot of really good meanings that were really similar to what the, well, really what the energy almost, it's what the transmission of a subtle energy. It describes it perfectly. And so then I'm sitting there one day at my computer because I have this as my screen, my screensaver. And I'm just like staring at it, and I'm like, well, there's the symbol right there. Forgot what it means on there.
Quintessence.
Oh, it just says quintessence, yeah.
Why don't you take a picture of that?
A what?
A picture?
Sure, yeah. You can find it online. But you can see how simplified that one I had on the screen is compared to that. Okay, so this is the camera that's on me.
That's the one that's on you. This is the one I keep trying to put on your thing, and then it keeps moving.
Okay,
So.
my concern is I'm trying to set this up so that the online audience will be able to see this, what I'm showing you right now.
Right. So this camera is going to focus on this table,
Oh, okay.
and this can remain on you, and I'll go back and forth as required.
Yeah, I'll talk about that.
Oops. Stop it.
have a copy of this.
I just
You can
took a
download it.
picture
It's
of
easily
Oh yeah, there's a
downloaded.
link on the bottom too. The website where you can find it.
All right, the bathroom is open if you want it.
Yeah.
Okay, I need you to be quiet as we walk through this. You open the curtain. Curtain quietly. I'm trying to keep the gremlins quiet. They're trying to be
You're doing pretty good for gremlins.
trying to be crazy kids.
Yeah, those are gremlins.
I don't know why. Mom's gonna go pee first, son, so you're not allowed to get upstairs without me. Come sit downstairs. Right here. Where you wash it.
Do you want me to send you the photo I took, Yvonne?
Yeah,
Or are you just,
no, you can
Jotted
try
down
that
the
because it
website.
might, your iPhone might take better pictures than mine.
well, it's really easy to expand and see them very, very easily. But it's, I wrote down the website as well.
Stella asked me, my friend's here, but her daughter, my other friend isn't here.
Right.
When do I get to see my other friend?
When we can arrange for a friend sitter. We need to do that in the future. Is maybe take turns doing a
Just sent it to you.
daycare thing. What happened?
Well, I didn't know you were going to move that again. I just went through gyrations to get this set
Well,
up.
I told you that I cannot set this up until I can go to the bathroom
Okay.
and sit down.
I need you to move forward because I'm limited by length of cables.
What? Are you,
And then move your chair forward.
and that doesn't work with the other one, does it? Unless you moved it.
Well, check it now. No, that's good.
Did you want this back?
Just set it down over there. I don't have any place to put it.
It's very cool.
Yeah, so the thing is, I don't know if any of it, is any of that used in the scientific periodic table?
No,
No.
very little. I mean, not in the periodic table, but I mean, obviously the astronomy still uses the symbols for the
So the
planets.
astronomy uses the
Yeah.
astrology symbols?
Yeah. Or you could say astrology uses the astronomy symbols.
Except for astrology came first.
Yeah. No, actually, they were all one science.
Yeah,
There,
no,
there
I-
was no
I know.
distinction.
Right.
And it wasn't until the church decided that people needed to stop including the spiritual aspects with their sciences that it got separated out.
Alright, we about ready.
Okay, so are we back? I think we're back.
You see that?
Yeah.
When we're online?
We are online.
Is there a way to project that on the screen?
Let me see. I don't think so. No. Not easily. You're welcome to go see
Yeah, I
over
am
and
going
watch.
to.
You can't see what they're seeing? Because they're seeing it,
I
right?
can't project it here.
Oh, okay.
That requires different setups than what we have.
Okay. So yeah, you can. There's nothing being projected, so as
Right.
long as you're not in between me, you can come over here and look. at
Okay.
it. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, but so this is just a tray of things that I would normally have available to pull from. In fact, this entire chest, and a lot of the things, well, the things in our bedroom are probably more of their own separate altar, but it's where we store and keep our sacred items. So, you know, in a simple world, all we need is earth, fire, water, and air, right? Once we start trying to align this with directions, then we're placing those in specific directions. Depending on your intent, I mean, any of these stones are going to represent earth, right? But if I need to have the the earthy part of air, I might use a stone that looks like a bird or something. What can we use besides incense for air?
Feathers.
Feathers,
Essential oil.
oils, anything that's an atmospheric that is going to ascent, right? So I also have, you know, the sweet grasses here, which even though it's not being burnt, let's say that we're doing something in a conference center where we can't burn something, we can still represent that element then, right, with something else.
So would incense be a combination of fire and air?
Technically,
Because
but
fragrance.
what it really is atmospheric. So in that case, you have to have something burning, so you have to have the fire to create the smoke, and then the smoke is going up. What?
She's online.
No, Mina, what are you doing to my pouch, Mina? You're not supposed to touch other people's sacred stuff. She's rubbing against it. So one thing that Coyote is clear about when setting an altar is that an atmospheric is not the same as air. Now, it can be in a simple altar. You might just have, you know, earth, fire, water, air. But both the flame and the incense then are sending your prayers up. So the atmospheric aspect of that is to lift and take up. The essential oils would do that, right? So they can be combined and be the same thing, just like the fire element can be combined and be part of that. But it's almost like we're creating a fifth thing, right? And it's the carrier wave that's going to take our message up and open that portal. So, what can we substitute for fire if we can't have a live flame?
One of those battery candles.
We can. Now, that's going to give us some ambiance, let's say like in our booth at the fair,
Right.
to have a little flickering candle and, you know, just that warm glow and something maybe that catches the light of the crystals and things to create more of an ambiance. Energetically, is a fake candle doing anything?
No.
Probably not. Well, what about incense? That's not an open flame.
It's not an open flame, but it's not fire. It's air. So the incense is, I mean, the liquid incense is a good option to not being able to burn incense. Sometimes they don't want you to even have anything, any of the essential oils and
Right.
stuff. So the feather then will work for that. But fire's a little tougher, right? Because you need to have something that, especially if you're trying to bring in a strong fire element, you know, if we need fire, Now we've been in an excess of fire around here recently where we might want to diminish that, in which case, yes.
No, I was just going to suggest that people use, look at the tables of correspondences. What corresponds to fire? Fire in our system is associated with the south and the direction.
Yeah, I
And,
was gonna say that.
and so anything that's associated with the sun can carry that. So certain minerals like sulfur or gold would carry that energy of fire as well.
You could have Pele, a picture of Pele.
Yeah.
Well, that's volcanic. That's more earth. She's the volcano goddess.
Oh, how about Coyote? That's the south.
Well,
It could work. There's
It
probably
could work.
something stronger, but even having a image of the sun, or something like that. Now, this is a little weird because this is actually amethyst, but it's got a flame cut to it. So something like that could, at least represent your flame. And then putting it next to a candle, a fake candle, could light it and sparkle it so that you have something emitting from it.
So that's why you had those turn things that lit up
Where?
with the crystals at the.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
So what she's talking about is the little display things that shoot up a laser light of
Yeah.
color, and it moves around, and you can stick a crystal on there because it's activating it, kind of. It's emitting it and it's allowing it to shine and sparkle and do its thing, and bring attention to itself. So the thing is that water can also be a problem. What if we should all have water on us, and yet there may not be a safe way to display water, in a particular environment. And I'll show you how to get past that one in just a minute. Now, besides, I tend to rely heavily on stones. But some stones have different energetic properties that are going to be more air-like or more earth-like or more fire-like. Think like a fire opal or something like that. So, you can use whatever you have, but what other things besides rocks would you use for earth?
You could use a flower.
Dirt.
Yeah.
You'd use dirt.
Dirt, flowers, plants, sticks, all of that's earth, right? And even the animal kingdom, for that matter, will fit into there.
ask the Tarot people here what represents earth in the Tarot.
What tarot people?
Way to go on the spot, Patty.
You know what? I don't know.
Oh.
I should
So,
know.
of
but
the
I don't-
four suits, it's one of the four suits.
Okay, wait. I'm gonna say wands.
No, that's fire.
That's
That burns.
fire.
That's something that burns. It's
Okay.
the coins, or the discs,
Ah, okay,
represents
pentacles.
earth.
Okay,
Or the pentacles.
okay.
Yeah. So anything, you can draw on that correspondence as well
Nice.
to answer some of these trick questions that you should already know the answer to.
So the thing about coins is that involves earthly prosperity. So if you're trying to invoke more prosperity, then you want to use earth elements. And this is one where, I would bring in definitely metal into earth, because A, that's where it comes from. But B, because of the whole coin idea, is to actually put some coins. For a long time when we were trying to change our prosperity around, there's these certain tricks about, making sure you always have $20 in your wallet. And we would actually put high denominational bills on our altar because it shows that we're not in lack of, and that we are, we're invoking this, and at the same time we're creating a space for it in our lives. And so coins is, so that's a good question because it brings out the fact that we're looking at correspondences here and things that you already know. If somebody was an astrologer in the group, there's things that they're going to look at this differently than a tarot practitioner would. Sorry, I don't know what the proper title is. Tarot reader. I think you're more than a reader. There's, you're reading. Yeah. So, but it's actually in doing a reading, you're looking at these elements in the way they rolled out and their predominance or not. In an altar, we're creating first and foremost a balance. So that's what that cross piece is in the middle. What are our coordinates? How are we going to play this game called altar today? And then with those basic balanced pieces, then you can invoke in certain areas. So when we needed rain during the fires, I set a big jar of water out on the Buddha altar. I might put more water element into the altar and less fire element. Or the fire would be contained. Like we have a particular, you've all seen the rose quartz votive holders. Well, we have one that's calcite, I think. Anyway, but it's opaque, it's solid, it's heavy, it's rigid, and more masculine, but it's also doesn't allow that much light out, so it's a little more of a contained flame. So every piece you place, you want to have some kind of idea of why you're putting it there and why you would create what might be perceived as an imbalance, but it's actually invoking something or diminishing something on purpose. You always want to have all four aspects represented. Okay? All right, so any other questions on, how to pull pieces? And you all had a chance, I believe, at the intensive to set an altar, but so up above here, you see we have our alchemical symbols for earth, fire, water, and air. And from that, now the directions in this room, if I know what I'm doing. And you should be able to set earth goes in the north, fire goes in the south, air in the east, water in the west, according to a basic altar system. You may be practicing something else. If you're asked to do something different, you want to know why. Okay? So that's basic working altars. The other idea of this is that when you're actually doing some kind of an invocation, that you're now the center of the universe. You're placing yourself here in front of your altar, and you're commanding everything around you and in your space. And so on one level, you're doing this on the earth plane, so we want to work with the directions. We want to work with the elements. And we want to bring in something higher, a fifth element, spirit. So remember that when you're going out into the world and you're taking these skills back, that you are the center of your universe. You are your own star. You are the magician. You are the alchemist. You are the orchestrator of everything that's going on around you. And know where you are. Know what you're calling in. Know how to close it down properly. In general, we don't like to extinguish a flame. Whenever possible, you want that eternal flame going. It's not practical with Kitty around to always have live flame. So we use like the salt lamps to always have something burning that's emitting off positive energy, or in this case, negative energy. Negative ions.
Which have positive effects.
Right. So now I want to show you something that Miss Charla brought in, and that is the concept of a dream altar. Now, these are a dime a dozen. You can get them at Michael's. But she chose a particular one based off of whatever constraints she was working with. So in other words, she determined that this was the right size box for what she was bringing through. The dream altars, there's a ceremony or an invocation, let's say, that goes along with it that connects this box then to the matrix of light. So with the Akadua, then there is a direct link to the creation and structure of this box and the contents thereof, and what we're doing with the matrix of light. Now, in this particular case, the class that you would go through would take you through a series of meditations to have you see an image that would represent both the full and the new moon. And then based off of that, it's kind of an art project where you get to decorate these however you'd like in order to have that symbolic representation that you gathered through a specific meditation to connect you and this box with the matrix of light. So it's kind of cute. It comes with, some information. It comes with some dreaming tea. It comes with one of her sparkly candles, which I don't necessarily recommend you use unless you have a fire extinguisher handy. Love you, Charla. And this is the stuff a little bit about what she calls Dreamer's Den, which is her group that works with the dreaming. And this is one of her tools that she brought through with the Akadua. And then this is, I'll pass this box around so you can look at it, but these are, I don't even know why they invented these, but they're like little water droplets. And they have some kind of, silicone thing that holds them in a droplet shape, but they actually have water in them. And when they start to dehydrate, you just water them and they absorb the water back into these little things. So this is an option to not being able to have water on your altar, is to have something like this that's going to represent that, and in this case actually has water molecules in it. So this is something that came with the kit. She also had, some special oils that she sent, and in this case, a stone and a feather. So feather is going to be our east, right? And our water is in the west, and our fire or candle is going to be in the south, and our stone is going to be in the north. So, can you see that online?
If you put it back over the table, they can. There you go.
Okay.
They can now see that.
So, I just created an altar. See how cool I am? It was that simple.
Is it active?
It is not activated yet at this point. And so, one of the other things that comes with this is a red bandana, because you're supposed to blindfold yourself while you're doing some of these aspects. And the process takes you through an activation of your altar to connect it. All right. So this is something that we as a school can do sometime. We can potentially do it as an online class because it has been videotaped. We just need to order the boxes from Charla, and this is what you get. Then what we need to do with that then is have a time where we do the arts and crafts part of it, where we have a bunch of construction paper and glitter or sequins or whatever it is that you want to make your thing. Yeah. And it's kind of fun to be able to do that, and it might be something that if we want, when Charla's up here again, we can arrange to do a Dream Altar class. So,
I would like
this, the reason for this is many-fold, but if you don't have a clean, neat place to keep your altar where rugrats won't get into it and destroy it and, whatever, is it can be all neatly contained in this. This can be taken on an airplane, it can go travel with you, it can do whatever. So
don't take the lighter on the airplane.
No. So that is how it comes, all right? Now, you got to keep in mind that A, I'm an artist, and B, I tend to overkill things. And 3, that I've been working on my altar for a while, and I've had specific reasons why I've wanted to or needed to do different stuff to it. We're not going to talk about Enochian symbols today, but that's what's on here is Enochian symbols done backwards so that the uninitiated can't read it. And this is the Enochian symbols on top, on the sides.
You got to keep it on the table. There. Now we can see it.
Okay. So that's my box. Now one of the features of this is that it wants to latch and everything this way, but she's designed them to be used this way. So I've also done some cool little cutout thingies on there. These you can buy really cheap at Michael's. Stained them differently so that when it was just sitting there, I could possibly even set up another little altar here on top if I wanted to. The idea is these are used specifically with the phases of the moon. So that's the entry level to it. And then obviously there's a lot of different ways that you can use them. So it's up to you at that point. So on the inside, I made my whole thing blue.
Beautiful.
Kind of for midnight blue for the universe and, you know, that Nuit kind of star energy. And so I have, I guess I totally messed it up. What did I do?
Well, you have it upside down.
I had it right to begin with. So I always keep mine this way so I don't do that. Okay, so these are this is what I saw when I did the meditation of a new moon. So that's the one I put out every new moon. I'll put this little inset in here.
Beautiful.
I have this set up so I just need to fold out my thing, but I completely messed it up because I had it upside down. And I just like to put all of these little tiny crystals in here as a base for putting other things on. And it should kind of be like that. And I can put my candle in here. And I have blue ones that represent the water. And I have a pogo feather that I substituted for the feather that came with it.
Nice.
And I guess all the crystals represent the stones, or the earth element, right? And the only other thing I keep in here is a little pendant that was given to me. I like somebody made the background on it, and then it has a pendant of the temple on top of it, which represents, you know, my celestial work. So that's always in here because it is. So that's the basic setup of the altar. So again, it's not rocket science, but I replaced all the elements that were given to me with things that had more meaning other than I still use the water. So I've also then created a series of cards. So when I initially did this is what came to me for the solar, for the full moon.
Nice mandala.
And what's interesting about that is that's not anything I would normally have ever designed. You know, it's like very traditional, almost patriarchal, you know. So, I don't know. It's just, that's what came to me when I did the work. So then I wanted, I lost my ball. One for equinox. Yeah, this is for equinox. So this is supposed to be on here like this. And so that was just, I repeated the exercise with the intention of having something to put up here for equinox. And so that's what I used for that. And then we had gone up to Oregon to see the eclipse. And this is what reminds me of the eclipse.
Wow.
and some of the, you know, real important factors of what was
like
involved in the energy and stuff.
It's like you just go into it.
Yeah.
In the eclipse.
Right.
It's like a portal.
Yeah. So there's that one, and then there's well, this one also. Looks like I need to do some glue work. This one is for the lunar eclipse. So the other was the solar eclipse. This is a lunar eclipse, which happened pretty much right after we got back. We had a lunar eclipse.
2 weeks later.
And I had got the online thing on how to do this, and so these were some of the first ones.
I love the honeycomb.
Yeah, well, and that reminds me of the way the energy was just shifty and weird. You know, it's just like the interference patterns and things. That's kind of what that's trying to represent for me. And same thing in this one, you know, where the ground just seemed like it was shimmering because of the eclipse.
Right.
So this is what I've done with my dream altar, and you can see that it's relatively portable, but there's a lot of stuff going on here that's specific and has meaning to me. So let's say I did need to be gone for a couple weeks to a month or something, I would have, you know, a good representation of the elements that I'm trying to work with, which includes a direct link to the matrix of light, as well as a lot of the sacred symbolism and geometry that I work with. And I asked Coyote to explain to me about the Enochian magic and Enochian symbols, and of course I got nothing. So
What are the Enochian symbols?
Another story for another day.
yeah, it's
Can you say it briefly, like in a short
Maybe
paragraph?
what is
No.
Enochian?
Yeah.
Enoch from the Bible.
Oh.
Yeah.
Left
Okay,
behind
got
a
it.
system, an esoteric system.
yeah.
Ah, okay.
And there's
Okay.
great parallels, and it's a whole nother system that I'm just learning about and that we reference only peripherally. Okay, so that's altars, and then before I move on to tools, and because an altar still is a tool, right? I wanted to show you this wand. So this has been on my altar for over 10 years, and I don't even know, I think it's ash. And so from a pagan kind of Celtic position, I really like this. I like, you know, the idea of a wooden wand out of a sacred, you know, wood, and the way that it's spiraled. It kind of reminds me of my staff, you know, that's spiraled.
Mm-hmm.
Has a little bit of a bent into it, but where we have actually done ceremony using swords and knives, this has a much more delicate purpose that I have not been initiated into or know how to use yet. I have not been called to bring this piece into service. So because of that, I will hand it around and let you look at it.
It's a Harry Potter wand.
It is a Harry
yeah.
Potter wand, and who wouldn't want a Harry Potter wand, you know?
Exactly.
It's just that I don't have a good reason yet for bringing that into service, and so because of that, I'm not going to just start using it. I'm going to save it. I think most of you are familiar with John Kirby's wands, and where everybody seems to be attracted to the sparkly, you know, light worker kind of stuff, of course. Mine was a little darker. And so this is actually a piece of leather from Coyote's coat that I'm going to make into some kind of a sheath for it, because I'm concerned about the tip getting broken. And so because of that, I haven't really started. It's been consecrated. I do use this, but I'm very careful with it because I don't have all the right protective equipment for it just yet. So these are some examples of sacred tools and altar items that you might acquire over time. But there needs to be a reason. You know, you don't just go and buy something just because it's pretty. You want to have an idea of what you're going to do with it, even if it's just a matter of sitting with it for a while and really, you know, letting it absorb your energy, you absorbing its energy, and then let it speak to you as a piece. But once you decide what and how to use it, consecrate it for that purpose and don't use it for anything else.
So that's my wand, my other wand. And so this is something that pretty much everybody needs to have something like this, even if you're not into spiritual work. We're used to in the city being much more reliant on everyone else for our protection. And yet the fact is, at any given moment, you could be in a survival-like situation where you have to be able to rely on your own instincts, your body of habits, those things that get you through. And for those of us who especially live up here in the mountains, your instincts also need to include bears and mountain lions and snakes and not having enough water and getting stuck in the snow. And all those things apply to axe murderers in the city and living next door to, you know, a rapist and living next door to somebody who's going to steal your stuff. You know, there's just as many predators, if not more, in the city than there are here in the mountains. But for some reason, they seem bigger and scarier. So be prepared. This is a fanny pack, a leather fanny pack that I've had like forever. Probably need to get a new one because my little clippy's broken. And in the back here, I have some really basic stuff. Okay, does anybody know what this is?
Flashlight.
No. It's flint. It's how you start a fire without matches. Okay?
Oh.
Yeah. And then I have a lighter. So until that runs out, I'll use that. And I have a flashlight. And I have a rape whistle that also has a compass on it. And I have a compass, which is broken right now. The idea is at one point I was resonating with the idea of being a firekeeper, but not necessarily in the Native American tradition. So what that meant to me is that I needed to know how and where and when to make a fire anytime I wanted to, and that what should also be in here, which is missing right now, is bundles of herbs. So it's something that I used to keep in this little satchel thing, and each type of herbs, whether it's tobacco for ceremonial purposes, whether it's you know, other medicinal herbs for whatever purpose. There should be a small wad of tinder in there. There should be, you know, a small bit of kindling, something so that I can at least, in any given situation, have a pretty good chance of lighting fire if I needed to. Otherwise, I'm screwed, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm stuck out somewhere and, you know, I can't get somewhere, I at least need to know how to make a fire. So those are some of the basic things from that idea that I have in place. This is more of a medicine bundle at this point for spiritual purposes, but the idea was that it was also going to be a bundle for basic first aid, basic survival stuff, whatever it needed to be.
Survival kit.
So I have an obsidian egg in here. Don't ask me why, but it's one of the things that I might want to work with in some given situation, and I know why. I guess that was the only thing in there. This is a wire wrapped crystal. It's got some sentimental value for a more ancient period. This Arlen and I went to a elementals class at Coyotes, and one of the things they gave us was this little thing with this little spray on it, and we were told that this was water that had been collected and saved, because this was only a couple years ago that we went to this class, collected and saved from our wedding, which has been 10 years ago now, that we brought, which was sacred water from the headwaters. So this is Sacred Waters from the Headwaters that we took to LA. We got married. Somebody saved some of that water and then had saved it and put it into a special thing that we used in the ceremony.
Nice.
So how cool is that? We didn't even know about any of that
That's
being
really
done.
sweet.
Yeah. So some of these things have some really intense meanings. I'm not going to dig through this whole bag, but I'm pretty sure that some of my son's ashes are in here.
And no knife?
Ha! It's right here. So this is usually on the fanny pack here. Now this is just a very cheap Renaissance knife that I bought 25 years ago that Golden Eagle has tried desperately to put an edge on, and it really doesn't have a good edge. But you want to have a knife that feels good in your hand. This one I like because of the weight of it, the way it fits my palm. You know, that if I did need to use this for self-defense, dull blade or not, I could gut a Roman with it. And so it's
Poor Roman.
it's something that, you know, when you're thinking about, okay, you went up into the mountains and you're going to meditate, right? And you want to start a little altar or a little fire or whatever it is. You need to be able to have something functional that you can cut up twigs with, or, you know, just basic stuff. It needs to be very utilitarian. So those are the basic things that I have in here. What's missing out of here is quick stuff to start a fire and some more of the first aid stuff. Apparently this is about all I have for first aid, but we did a project last year where we put together first aid kits made out of all natural stuff. So it would have arnica and things like that in it. So that might be a fun project for us to do sometime, to go into something like this, you know. And then the other thing that I keep in here is my Dreamstone. This is just a basic selenite piece. Nina had gifted it to me several years ago. I like the little pouch thing for it. It's kind of got a point on it so that I can use it to direct energy. I do know it fits well in my hand, both directions, depending on what I want to do. But it's not so thin and fragile that I would be worried about taking this out in the woods with me and breaking it or damaging it. And it's not so expensive that if I did do that it wouldn't be the total end of the world. But it's a nice working piece. So those are some of the considerations you want to think about when you're talking about traveling and so forth with some of these sacred items. So we've got the is this back up? Because we're done with this.
Okay, so I will put the camera back on you, and I will get this other camera out of the way.
Is it just getting out of the way, or is it going to go back on that?
Well, I was going to try it back on that, just for grins,
Just for grins.
to see about my theory.
Some of the things that are coming up, though, with the sacred tools, okay, so why and when to use them, discovering them rather than just going out and buying something, you know, crafting, creating your own thing. So most of you have seen my staff that I have. I've had that for 25 years, and it's something that grew the way it grew, but at the same time, I crafted it. You know, I've polished it. I have carved runic inscription on it. You know, I've created bases for the tip so it doesn't ruin the wood and so forth. So things will speak to you, and you need to respond adequately, but at the same time you want to know why you're doing what you're doing. So cleansing, dedicating it to a particular purpose. Am I going to use this knife to cut a steak? Maybe, only because I have to, and because it's a utilitarian knife. If it was, you know, a ceremonial knife, it wouldn't even be good for cutting a steak, right? So that means it has a higher significance as far as the symbolism you're using it for, in which case you wouldn't want to lower that by, just throwing it in your dinner. Cleansing can be done several different ways. In particular, you want to know what it is you're cleansing, and especially if it's stones and things that can be ruined. Salt can ruin things, water can ruin things, smoke usually won't ruin anything, so waving something through a bath of smoke is probably the easiest thing. Sending it energy to neutralize whatever's going on may be significant enough. But when you can, also taking it through over a piece of sulfur or through those tourmaline terminals on the beacon, is another way of energetically cleaning it.
And you can use the Akadua to do something very similar too.
I'd said that.
There's a way of, not just sending it though, there's a way of that scanning. method.
Scanning it, okay.
Yeah.
So in that way, cleansing though may be necessary. Dust in particular is, it's tough. So as long as you know that the crystals that you're cleaning are not going to dissolve because you left them in water too much, or they're not going to, ruin the finish on them, then that's one way of doing it. A lot of times people will just leave things out under the full moon or in the sunlight or whatever. Some things you don't want to do that for a long period of time because it can discolor, especially like amethyst and so forth in the sun. So maybe you cleanse those in the moonlight. And charging them, you're also charging them with energy as well. Especially if it was something that had to do with that particular element. So you want something to be more of a water-based thing, so wash it in water. You want something to be more of an air-based thing, so cleanse it with smoke. But basically, to actually physically clean things is to keep it really simple. Don't be adding harsh chemicals or anything like that to your crystals. Make sure that you have looked into what is the best method, and then choose the best one depending on the situation. You'll notice that I'm taking the time to put everything away, because the easiest way that we have to desecrate our stuff is to just leave it out where the cat and the kids and everybody else can get to it. So cleaning and then consecrating and storing. So we've talked, I think, enough about consecration other than how to actually do it. And there's going to be different systems depending on what spiritual system you're following. But, any kind of basic prayer of invocation or stating of intent and purpose is going to help accomplish that need. So storing them, you guys on break are welcome to look at some of these methods. What? Thank you. Of storing things. I bought this on a whim. It was when I was we were buying the journals for the level 4 class, and this was like on the sale rack for like $4, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but it's cool. And when I was buying it, the lady at the checkout stand says, "Oh, that's really cool. What are you going to do with it?" I don't know what I'm going to do with it. But I came home, and my wand fit right into it.
Okay.
And so at least it gives me something
Extra protection
to keep it from getting broken.
And you know what's in there.
And I know what's in there. Yeah. So thank you.
All right, moving right along.
Okay. Creating space. Each one of these things could be a whole workshop, just like every point we're going through. The reason we put the idea of the Holy Grail there is think about the fact of what the Holy Grail is. Holy Grail has a lot of different connotations. I think historically people like to think of it as the chalice that held the blood of Christ. So it's a container that's going to hold something precious, right? if you think about the fact that the Holy Grail was actually Mary Magdalene and that she was carrying Christ's child, that doesn't diminish the meaning of it, right? So we're creating a space where something can happen. And so that space is the Grail. That space is the chalice. That space is the womb. It is where something is going to be created, right? And so in that way, some of these things we've already been talking about. Feng Shui, if you are interested truly and will do something with it, I would be happy to do a class on this at some point. I don't claim to be a Feng Shui expert. It is very complicated and in depth when you look into all the astrology part of it and all the kind of fear-based superstitions of like flying darts and things and all that. But in its very simplest, when you're trying to create a space, if you think about the fact that if we opened a door right now and let in a gust of wind, how would that wind or that breeze in the room navigate? It came through this door and the first thing it hit was the back of my head, it's going to get pushed in different directions, right? So we want to have this kind of nice flow that when a door or a window is opened and that energy, that chi from out in the world and in the matrix is coming in and permeating our space, we want it to flow. And if the first thing it hits into is a stack of books that have been sitting there for 6 years, or old magazines, or trash, or whatever, it's going to diminish the quality of the energy that's flowing through the space. So in general, some of the basic Feng Shui principles are, A, to clean physically, and B, to organize so that you don't have traps where energy will get stuck. And most important with that are things sitting around idly without an intent. So it's just a big stack of crap that someday you're going to go through it and figure it out and organize it. Right now, it's sucking energy. So after having just gone through the level 4, gotten rid of a bunch of your rocks, realize that same concept now applies to a lot of other things that are holding you back from your path. So there's ways that we can reclaim energy all the time by using Feng Shui principles. And a lot of that is just keeping things clean and organized and not allowing clutter to build up. So cleansing and purification are two different things. We've cleaned the room already. Now, in one way, we're cleansing it. We can cleanse it energetically. We can, smudge. We can do a lot of things to cleanse the space. But then we can actually introduce things that are going to purify it. So it's kind of like washing your hands in water versus then adding soap or disinfectant or something that's going to really kill germs or something. And so in that way, the purification are more in addition to just doing the smudging or lighting incense, is to bring in purifying aspects, whether it's energy, higher light, higher intention, higher connections, and in many cases it's going to include doing something like a banishment and an invocation to actually make it more of a sacred space. In one way, the purification could be the activation of the space, especially if you're not doing a formal banishment or something. You want to get everything feng shuied. Everything's already been cleaned. Like normal house cleaning, you already did that. Then you're going to look at the feng shui of the space. Remember, every time we had to kind of move things around in the intensive, we'd get it a certain way, but then when we're done, it's all just kind of discombobulated. We need to pull everything back in together and get it organized again in a nice flow. And then the purification of that is setting it off. It's taking it to another level, another purpose, a higher purpose. If you set the space when you're cleaning for that higher purpose, when you feng shui for that higher purpose, when you cleanse for that higher purpose. You've already done a lot of that, but then there needs to be an actual activation of it, a beginning and then an end, always. So the intention and your attention while you're doing each one of those processes is critical to it. Now that doesn't mean that, again, if you're okay, so you're hiking in the backwoods 2 weeks into the Sierras and you realize you're out of water. Okay, that's not an easy fix. You need to sit down, create a space, create an altar, and do some serious invocation to find out A, how and where can I get water quickly, and B, you know, how do I get myself out of this situation. And so in that case, you know, getting all of these other things into alignment first are critical, but you may not have the time always to do all of this. But to the best of your ability, each one of these steps is going to make your invocation more powerful. So attention and intention, we should know those by now. Working with the elements, working with color. In the spirit world, color is easily recognizable. So if everybody in your group is wearing a red bandana, you're going to be able to identify each other more quickly in the dreaming and in other landscapes, whatever that might be. So having a little uniform or whatever, you know. How do you know when you got 60 actors on stage who is the good guys and who's the bad guys? You color coordinate them. You have the blue army and you have the red army, and yes, that's how you have to have some way of distinguishing things. So when we looked at that picture of the Tree of Life in the beginning, and then we had the colored one next to it, the black and white one was so you could focus more on some of the symbolism that was actually on there. The colored one is going to help draw you to, oh, okay, I'm working on this aspect, I need to include these things because they're all colored the same way. So it's a quick identification method, and it's part of the archetypal language. And then lighting. Okay, so lighting is done for a lot of different reasons. A, so that we can see, so that, you know, whatever we're focusing on can be illuminated properly. And then from there, we have different types of lighting. So if you're not, you know, familiar with it, this is an up lamp. A torch lamp is setting light up onto the ceiling. That's going to help illuminate the room and put light in the room. It's not going to help us read because it's not shining down. So we have uplighting, downlighting, we have focused light like lasers, we have diffused light, we have candlelight. All of those things are going to bring a different aspect to our space. And then atmospherics. So atmospherics shouldn't be confused with atmosphere. So we can create a nice atmosphere by using the right lighting and the right color and the right feng shui. But an atmospheric is what is conveying, it's the channel, it's the connector rod, taking whatever we're doing up to the higher realms. And so in that way, you want to be thinking about all of those aspects whenever you're creating space. Questions about any of that?
I got it.
I was just trying to figure out where we were at.
We're behind schedule
Yeah, I see that.
quite a lot. So I'm going to say we take a lunch break here.
Well, I really think we need to get through these last 3 slides, and we just need to get them done, so I won't talk as much.
So okay. Do you want to do these? Do you want me to?
I can just get through them quickly.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's get through them really quickly then.
Okay, so clearing and banishing a space. So like we said, you go up into the mountains, you want to do something, you've already asked for permission, but you still then have to claim your space. You have to say, okay, this circle here that I drew in the sand is the area I'm going to work in. And you're basically going to banish anything out of that space that you don't want there to be there, and to call in what you do want to have there. All right? So why and when to do that? Those are part of your intention and attention. You need to know why you're doing it and what all is involved. Can you give a quick definition between invoke and evoke?
Well, they basically do the opposite. Invoke brings something in, evoke drives something out.
How's that not a banishment?
They're aspects of it.
Okay.
It's the banish is just sending away.
Right.
Invoking is then bringing in. So evocation is very, very similar to a banishment. I guess there's probably some Thelemites or others who practice Western magic who might argue subtle details, which in my mind would fall into the category of picking fly shit out of the pepper.
Okay, I would disagree. There's a definite difference, and I'll look it up when we're on break.
Between
I'll look it up
banishment and evocation.
No, invoke and evoke.
No, they're opposite, is what I said.
Okay, I will look it up when we're on break. The cleansing aspect here is big. So we're talking about the same things we just talked about. Cleansing a space, purifying a space, and then dedicating it for a particular purpose. So we're just repeating these same things, but you can see how this builds and how it's important. Until you know how to purify and cleanse something, you're not really ready to be doing higher level clearings and banishments. But that doesn't mean that at any given time you shouldn't be invoking your own protection and that of your client. So kind of go back to the analogy of working with somebody in a massage room. You know, no, this isn't a high level esoteric ritual. We're doing massage. But at the same time, we're creating a space, we're holding that space, we're clearing that space, and we're invoking in what we want to be there. So dedicating a space, okay, it's really, really nice when you can get to a point where you can dedicate a space. We don't even really have that here in our home. This chest is dedicated to keeping altar items in. But we don't really have a room necessarily that we can keep set up, purified, cleansed, dedicated for a particular purpose of doing ritual or whatever it is we want to do. So this room becomes more of like a utilitarian room. And so each of these steps is necessary each time we want to do anything in this room. So the ritual, basically what you're doing is you're opening a space, you're doing your ritual or whatever ceremony it is. It could be a marriage ceremony. And then you want to close the space because remember, you've opened a vortex, you're allowing the higher realms to come in, the higher energies to come in, and at some point you need to consciously close that so you don't leave these holes everywhere. And then the karmic vacuum is the biggest reason for this. The reason you don't want to jump into a true banishment ritual is because it creates an empty space that needs to be filled with something. And if you don't consciously fill it with something intentional, anything can fill that space. So some of you may have even experienced right after the level 4 where you karmically cleared your rocks and everything else and then went back into your blue pill world and had everything collapse back in on you because you didn't fill that space, that void, with something intentional. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later today, but if that comes back to your personal practice. That's what you're filling the void with right now. Okay. So, let's skip this one. So working the pentagram. Now everybody seems to be a little flipped out about the pentagram because, oh my gosh, that must be occult, and especially if you draw it upside down, it must mean some, horrible evil thing. So don't go there. This that we saw earlier is a basic geometric pattern that came from our division of 2 circles into a Vesica Pisces, into a triangle, into a pentagram, a pentagon, into a pentagram. So there's a geometric reason why this is the way it is. But I want you to think about this as being the 4 elements tipped out and the spirit being above it, which is actually a pyramid. So spirit is there in addition to the 4 elements. So we're setting our earthly base and then we're adding this spiritual element. So the difference between invoking and banishing is the way you would draw this. So in the case of a banishment, you're taking usually earth up, taking up, and then you finish drawing it. Now, if you do that in reverse, you're bringing that down. So this is really simple, and it seems to seem really complicated, but again, you've got to have a good purpose for doing any of it, right? Before you start drawing pentagrams and invoking or banishing things, you want to know why. And that's why the banishment that we work with is both a banishment and an invocation, so it's so safer. It doesn't allow that vortex or that void to create, to allow everything to collapse back into. And yet, it's as simple as drawing the pentagram in the opposite direction to emphasize something different. And let's say in the case, we're working from Earth, Malkuth, most of the time, but what if we wanted to work with the fire elements to suppress maybe some of the fires that we're happening this summer, or to bring in more water or whatever? This is how we balance those things. But it all has to be done with a conscious intention. Is there one more slide? So this is where we talk about holding space. So holding space is not doing anything to or for another person. You are simply holding the space that we talked about creating spaces. So how do you hold that? And a lot of this is just taking part of your attention and placing it there. And splitting your attention between what you might have to be doing in the moment and what needs to be done in some other space. So, for example, we talked about, Nina's on retreat in Florida right now. So we might have really loved to go to that retreat. We might actually want to be there ourselves and try energetically connecting with her so that we can be part of what she's doing. How does that work with ethics?
That's very good.
Not good.
Not good.
Well, it depends on whether or not you ask permission.
Exactly.
Right. Perfect. So, at the same time, if we want to keep connected with Nina as part of pogging and being part of the group, we're basically sending out a little radar ping, and it comes back, and it's like, okay, Nina's out there. Yes.
Yeah, and she poggingly pinged me this morning as she was getting ready for her event. She had a question, which I answered, and so she told me what time she was going to be doing her Akadwa transmissions today, which was 8 our time. So as I was going around my morning, I was connecting with her because we pinged in, and so she's there doing her thing, and we're here doing ours.
Cool.
Very cool.
So holding space then is, it's giving a portion of our attention to someone else, to just simply be aware of where they're at and what they're doing, and there's a reciprocal part of that where you realize that you're not out there by yourself. So we all went through the level 4 intensive, then we went home and we were all out there in our individual lives trying to deal with how to implement all this stuff. If you sensed or felt at certain points the presence of other people, it should have been that they were holding space for you as you were going through whatever you were going through, And so it's important to know how to hold space and not interfere and not make it a bigger deal than it is and not have it take you away from what you're trying to do. So another good example is when I really started working on this was when I was creating Coyote's coat. Now, I was the only one that could do it, and I was in my shop by myself, preparing to cut it out or pattern make or do whatever process I was having to do. And so at the same time, we were getting ready to get married and stuff, and so several of Coyote's key people were also going to be bridesmaids or priestesses in our wedding. And so I asked the 3 of them to hold space for me while I was working on the coat. And when I was done, I would ping them and say I was done, you know. And this went on for several months. But at least I felt like if energetically there was something else intruding in that space, trying to attack that space, trying to interfere with the process in some way, I could be free to be working and know that those 3 other people were holding space for me. They didn't have anything to do with the process otherwise, you know, that I know of.
Right.
So you recall when we were to level 4, I had created a shell, an energetic higher plane shell around there. And in the back of my mind, all week long, I was maintaining that space. So that's another example of holding space. Okay, next up is, lunch.
So I'm gonna need like probably 20 minutes in the kitchen.
Okay.
I don't need a lot of help. I will need help maybe setting the table or getting drinks or whatever for lunch. In the meantime, I recommend that you, you know, go to the bathroom, you know, check your cell phones, do whatever you have to do. But I would like to be back here ready to start by 2:30. Otherwise, we're getting too late.
Yeah.
And
So for you online folks, we're going to be back here at 2:30 and be starting very shortly thereafter. So we're going offline. All right. See you at 2:30.